Warrior Lore. Chapter 3877. Unfortunately, the previous life is the previous life, and this life is this life. Xiaohua said with a smile, Yu Zhongquan. Since you understand, then Master will make you forget. Can you bear to? Yu Zhongquan closed his eyes and raised his head slightly. Some tears flowed from his eyes again. Then, Yu Zhongquan nodded and said, Disciple understands Master's words. Disciple is too naughty and has made Master worry. Since this is the current life, Disciple should forget everything from the previous life. Disciple is willing to start from this life, willing to start from this moment. Good. Xiaohua reached out and touched Yu Zhongquan's forehead again. Yu Zhongquan closed his eyes and opened them again. He touched his face in surprise and said, Io, Master, what happened to Disciple? You feel honored to be the disciple of a handsome Taoist cultivator like Master. You can't help but be moved to tears. Xiaohua replied indifferently, Lu Yi, ride the flying carriage to Gun Province. Master is tired and wants to rest for a while. Yes, Master. Lu Yi didn't dare to delay and hurriedly rode the Pegasus to Gun Province. Yuanya also sat beside the Pegasus and accompanied Lu Yi. Chang Yuan looked at the two's back and thought for a while. Then, she smiled and said, Junior brother Yu, the heart has a sword, and the sword soul is born. What does this mean? What? Junior brother? Yu Zhongquan jumped up like a cat whose tail was stepped on. How did I become a junior brother? Not only are you a junior brother, but you are also the youngest. Lu Yi replied with a smile. Yu Zhongquan was dumbfounded. This? No one forced you to get married. Your senior sister from the same sect is asking you a question. Can you not answer? Yuanya looked at the ambiguous relationship between the two and said with envy in his heart, This. Yu Zhongquan hesitated for a moment. Then, like a defeated rooster, he lowered his head and answered Chang Yuan's question. Yes, the previous life is the previous life, and the current life is the current life. Why bother with it? Xiaohua sat cross-legged in the flying carriage with his eyes closed in meditation. Although there were no fluctuations around him, his Tao heart and Tao realm were improving rapidly. The karma technique was also gradually becoming clearer. It wasn't just a single day. Dark clouds covered the sky in front of him, lightning flashed, and rain poured down like a heavenly river. Lu Yi hesitated for a moment. At this moment, two telepathic thoughts scanned the area from the left. Once they discovered the flying car, they immediately retracted it. Oh! Xiaohua opened his eyes and instructed, Lu Yi, stop for a moment. How far is this place from the Fiend God blood pool? All right, Father understands. Lu Yi stopped the flying chariot and said respectfully, We are already in Gun Province. According to the information I gathered, we are about 5,000 kilometers away from the God-Fiend blood pool. It looks like someone is coming over. You should return to the Kunlun immortal realm to cultivate. Master will call Fujiwen out. Xiaohua raised his eyes to look at the place where the dark clouds were gradually spreading and said with narrowed eyes, Yes, Master. Lu Yi bowed respectfully. Xiaohua took out the Kunlun mirror and put Lu Yi away before letting Fujiwen out. Master, you've decided to go to the God-Fiend blood pool? Fujiwen looked around and asked when he saw the flying carriage stopped in midair. Xiaohua nodded. That's right. These days, Master has carefully pondered over Zhu Cheng's words. They do make some sense. Previously, Master didn't know that there were so many conflicts within the 100 schools of Confucian cultivators, so Master blindly hid my strength, afraid of being noticed by them. But after hiding for a long time, I was still attacked by the Immortal Palace. Instead of that, it's better to take advantage of the conflicts between the 100 schools of Confucian cultivators and the gap between the Immortals and Buddhas to form some alliances. Although the Soaring Dragon Mountain Range's Fortune Gate does not need to be known by others, the forces Master obtained in the Jade Pavilion banquet must be used. AI. Master's ability to judge the situation is still inferior to the Zhu family's patriarch. Master is thinking too much. Fujiwen comforted. Zhu Cheng is the Zhu family's patriarch. He has received training in this area since he was young. Master is benevolent and focused on cultivation, so Master is naturally weak in this area. Didn't Master often say that? There's no need to be envious of others. That's true. Master is somewhat undervaluing himself. Oh, that's right, disciple. How do you feel after the heavenly book was sealed? Xiaohua nodded slightly and asked. Fu Jiwen smiled apologetically. Ever since Disciple's heavenly book was sealed by Master, Disciple suddenly felt empty in Disciple's heart. Other than reciting some books, Disciple refined his true chi. Disciple seemed to have understood a little, but also seemed to not understand much. However, this kind of dull cultivation was what Disciple liked in the early years. AI, as the saying goes, dull is real. Perhaps this kind of cultivation method without desires is the right way. In the early years, you condensed the heavenly book in your body because you were dull and followed fate. If you were so eager for quick success in the early years, heavenly book probably wouldn't have been fated with you. Xiaohua sighed. Let's not talk about you. Even today's Confucian cultivators seem to have made mistakes in their pursuit and have long deviated from their previous principles. Of course, this kind of mistake might be an improvement, or it might be correct. However, without the cultivation of one's heart, how can one achieve the great Tao? Yes, disciple understands. Fu Jiwen said sincerely, if disciple didn't meet master, disciple would have already fallen. The problem is, if disciple didn't meet master, disciple wouldn't be so eager for quick success. Xiaohua said with a smile. He raised his hand, and a three-colored flame appeared between his middle finger. Inside the flame, there were 4 colors flowing. Xiaohua looked at the fire spot, and his eyes lit up. These are some wonderful things that Master has just obtained. Although they are not complete, they are enough for you to comprehend. If you can comprehend 30% of them, you will be able to control the heavenly book. Fu Jiwen hurriedly knelt on the ground and said, Thank you, Master, for your help. Xiaohua waved his hand, and the flame fell from the top of Fu Jiwen's head and entered his middle dantian. The true qi in Fu Jiwen's chest immediately became lively, as if it had a life of its own. Get up. Xiaohua helped Fu Jiwen up and said, Whether it's cultivation or doing things, remember that haste makes waste. Don't be too radical in the future. Yes, Master. Disciple doesn't dare anymore. Fu Jiwen replied respectfully. At this point, Fu Jiwen raised his head in surprise and asked, Master, someone is coming? Yes, it should be Dao sect cultivators. I wonder if they're heading to the Fiend God blood pool? Or do they have ulterior motives? Xiaohua replied indifferently, We'll wait here. Not long after, 2 cultivators in Taoist robes flew over together. The 2 of them were only in the gold core stage. When they flew close, their gazes fell on Xiaohua, and they were both stunned. Then, the 2 of them sped up and arrived in front of the flying car. They respectfully saluted and said, Juniors Su Chuanping and Chunjua greet Senior Xiao. Xiaohua was surprised to see the 2 of them recognize him, but there was nothing unusual on his face. He raised his hand and said, Get up, let's talk on the flying car. Thank you, Senior. As the 2 of them spoke, they did not dare to be negligent and boarded the flying car. They smiled and nodded at Fu Jiwen, who was driving the car, and sat cross-legged in front of Xiaohua. Su Chuanping glanced at Chunjua and said, Senior Xiao, Junior heard that in front of the Black Wind Ridge, Senior displayed his divine might and defeated the immortal general of the Immortal Palace. This has greatly increased the prestige of our Dao sect cultivators. After Junior heard this, I really wanted to fly to the Black Wind Ridge to witness Senior's might. Hee, how could it be as exaggerated as the legends say? Xiaohua waved his hand and laughed. The real situation is far from what you think. Although I was able to escape unscathed, the Black Wind Ridge and the Jiang country were both destroyed by the Immortal Palace. I have been on tenterhooks for the past few days, afraid that the Immortal Palace will attack again. Senior is too modest. Chunjua laughed and said, Since Senior has defeated that true Lord Qin, how could the Immortal Palace send any other immortal generals over? Wouldn't bullying the weak be laughed at by others? They flattened the Jiang country and the Black Wind Ridge and barely had a fig leaf to cover their shame, so they could explain it to the Confucian cultivators. Yes, perhaps. Xiaohua nodded, but I am indeed. Sigh, forget it, let's not talk about the Black Wind Ridge anymore. Where are the 2 of you heading to? Su Chuanping blinked his eyes and laughed. Is there even a need to say? Naturally, we have the same goal as Senior Xiao. Oh? Xiaohua asked with interest. Could it be that the two of you know where I am going? Su Chuanping laughed. We heard that the Chu family of the Jing state had sent out a hero's invitation, wanting to find a demon god's chest in the blood god's pool of gods and devils. Our cultivation realms are still shallow, so we cannot enter the eyes of the Chu family. However, the blood god's pool is a place of opportunity, so we came to take a look. As for Senior, if Junior's guess is correct, you must have received a hero's invitation to head to the blood god's pool. Or perhaps Senior did not receive the hero's invitation and is heading to the blood god's pool this time to come into contact with the Jing state's Chu family. Of course, this is all just our wild guesses. If it's wrong, Senior, please don't be angry. Yes, your thoughts are more or less the same. Xiaohua nodded. I have offended the Immortal Palace. Although the Immortal Palace might not have the time to take care of me right now, once they have the opportunity, they will definitely use thunderous methods to deal with me. I have no choice but to make preparations in advance. Senior is right. Since Senior was able to defeat true monarch Qingyuan, your cultivation has already surpassed the Immortal Palace's bottom line. Aristocratic families of the 3rd class and above might look down on Senior's strength, and aristocratic families of the 5th class and below would not dare to go against the Immortal Palace's orders. Since Senior does not want to be arrested by the Immortal Palace, it is appropriate for you to come into contact with the 4th class Chu family, Chen Zhua said with a smile. Xiaohua smiled. He understood that Su Chuanping and Chen Zhua had misunderstood that he wanted to rely on the Chu family. However, he did not explain and asked again. During this time, I have been hiding from the Immortal Palace's pursuit, so information is somewhat blocked. I have a question to ask the two of you. Senior, please speak. Chen Zhua hurriedly said. Actually, I am a bit curious. Although Xiaohua already had a plan in mind and knew that the matter of the Blood God's pool was not as simple as Song Zixiong had said, he still wanted to hear Su Chuanping and Chen Zhua's opinions. Only then did he ask. The Divine Devil's Chess is only one of the 10 great imperial artifacts, and it is only ranked 5th. Why is the Chu family searching for it with such great fanfare? Especially since the Chu family is in Jing state. Isn't it a bit excessive for them to reach out to Gun state? -13. Chapter 3878. This, Su Chuanping and Chen Zhua's faces were slightly awkward, but they immediately smiled and said, to tell you the truth, we also feel that it's a bit strange. However, this is a matter of a scholarly family. We don't have much information, so it's hard to guess. Anyway, we only want to look for opportunities. If possible, it's best to form a good relationship with the Chu family. If we have any difficulties in the future, we can ask them for help. As for the strangeness of the matter, we really didn't think much about it. That's true. Xiaohua smiled. This has nothing to do with us Taoism cultivators. Why should we care about it? Even if the Chu family occupies the Immortal Palace, it has nothing to do with us. Yes. Su Chuanping and Chen Zhua hurriedly nodded. If that's the case, we Taoism cultivators might even be able to benefit from it. Fu Jiwen, who was waiting in front of the carriage, heard Xiaohua's words and was moved. He hurriedly transmitted his voice, Master. Disciple faintly heard that the 9 provinces of the hidden immortal continent are respectively controlled by 100 scholarly families. Jing province and Gun province. Could it be that they're controlled by a scholarly family? That's right. Fu Jiwen's reminder immediately woke Xiaohua up, and he transmitted his voice. There are vague records in scholarly books. However, Jing province and Gun province aren't controlled by a scholarly family. Jing province belongs to the school of legalism, while Gun province belongs to the school of military. If I'm not mistaken, the Chu family belongs to the school of legalism, while Gun province should be controlled by the school of military of the Immortal Palace. For the Chu family to extend their hands to the god-fiend blood pool of military, I'm afraid there's something fishy that others don't know about. Could it be? Fu Jiwen was shocked. The school of legalism wants to take advantage of the war between immortals and Buddhas to invade the Immortal Palace's power on the hidden immortal continent. How can a fourth-rate family be so daring? Xiaohua sneered. There must be other scholarly families behind the Chu family. For great families. Fujiwen blurted out, Dongfang, Shimin, Nangong, and Baiming. It seems that Zhu Cheng was right. Xiaohua nodded. Maybe Zhu Cheng already saw through the secret, but he was afraid that I wouldn't be able to put my face down, so he sent me to the Godfiend blood pool. If I can make contact with the 4 great families, they'll definitely protect me. I won't have to be afraid of the Immortal Palace. But from another perspective, I've also become a pawn of the 4 great clans. The 4 great clans, are you planning to use the Confucian cultivators and Taoist cultivators of the hidden immortal continent as chess pieces? Seeing that Xiaohua had his head lowered in thought, Chenhua thought for a moment and hurriedly said, Junior received a piece of news before. I don't know if it has anything to do with the Chu family's actions in the blood pool of gods and devils. Oh, fellow Taoist, please speak. Xiaohua raised his head and asked. Actually, this isn't the first time the Chu clan has done something like this. When I was still a Foundation Establishment cultivator, I saw a nascent soul cultivator receive a command talisman from the Chu clan. The command talisman said that the Chu clan wanted this senior to go to a certain place to help. At that time, it wasn't as grand as it is now, but many Taoist cultivators knew about it. But for some reason, there was no news from that time. I don't know if this is related to the last time. Command talisman? Xiaohua calmed down and smiled. Have you seen that command talisman before? I have. Chenhua nodded and replied. It's somewhat similar to the tiger talisman used by the secular world. Is it this? Xiaohua took out the token Chu Mu Huan gave him back then and asked. Chenhua glanced at it and smiled. Senior Xiao really received an invitation from the Jing province's Chu clan. This item is exactly the same as the one I saw. Xiaohua replied thoughtfully. This token wasn't obtained by this old man recently. It was given to me by a Chu clan disciple a long time ago. Speaking of which, this old man owes him a favor. Actually, if fellow Taoist hadn't mentioned it, this old man wouldn't have thought that the token from that time had anything to do with this. With this token, we can meet the Chu clan's patriarch. This trip won't be in vain. Chenhua and Su Chuanping glanced at each other and hurriedly stood up and cupped their hands. Senior Xiao, please introduce us to you. Xiaohua waved his hand and gestured for the two to sit down. It's fate that brought us together. Follow this old man to the Fiend God blood pool. As for whether you can get anything good, it'll depend on your luck. Master, the thunderstorm ahead has stopped. Should we continue? At this moment, Fujiwen asked from the front. Xiaohua smiled. Of course we should. Although I don't know what the Chu clan has planned, the earlier we go, the more benefits we can get. Hee. Senior is right. Chenhua and Su Chuanping smiled. Fujiwen urged the flying carriage to fly into the thunderstorm. However, Chenhua suddenly realized something. He looked at Fujiwen and asked in a low voice, Senior Xiao, is this your disciple? Xiaohua understood Chenhua's misgivings and smiled. This old man has been conquered by the Immortal Palace. Who cares about their bullshit rules? Yes. Chenhua smiled and said, This junior knows. Actually, what this junior wants to ask is, why did senior accept a Confucian disciple? Oh, so fellow Taoist is asking about this. Xiaohua suddenly realized something and replied. This old man also knows a little about the cultivation method of Confucian cultivators. This old man taught this disciple the cultivation method of Confucian cultivators. Senior Xiao. Chenhua was surprised and his eyes flashed with envy. Su Chuanping said with a bit of jealousy, no wonder Senior was able to get the Chu clan's token. With Senior's identity as a dual Confucian cultivator, not to mention a 4th-rank aristocratic family, even a 2nd-rank aristocratic family would welcome you. That's Senior Xiao. Chenhua said flatteringly. This one has been cultivating for so long, but I have never heard of a Taoist cultivator on the hidden immortal continent who is proficient in both Confucian and Taoist cultivation. After saying this, Chenhua and Su Chuanping saw that Xiaohua was really amiable and approachable, so they hurriedly took this opportunity to ask him about the difficulties they faced in their cultivation. Xiaohua just listened for a bit and knew that they had made mistakes in their cultivation. He then gave them pointers in their cultivation according to what the two said. Just as the two were immersed in listening, a few days passed in the blink of an eye. They saw a red haze in the distance, like a huge steamer, with red steam rising from the ground all the way to the sky. The area it covered was so large that even Xiao Hua's soul sense couldn't see the end of it. Master, Fujiwen stopped the flying carriage. He frowned and said in a low voice, "The demonic god blood pool is in front of us. However, it seems a bit different from when this disciple first came here." Xiao Hua heard the explanation and withdrew his soul sense. He asked in a low voice, "What's the difference?" When this disciple first came to the Gun province, his cultivation wasn't very high, so he could only watch from afar. The demonic god blood pool didn't have so much blood mist above it. Even birds can't fly over it. The main reason is that there is no place to rest in the blood pool. Ordinary birds can't fly over it without rest. But now, the blood mist has covered an area of 10,000 miles. Even birds can't enter. Fujiwen looked into the distance and said carefully, "Also, this place is still some distance away from the blood pool, but the air is filled with a kind of evil aura. It smells like a sharp sword that can hurt people. Not only is it very sharp, but it also gives people the urge to kill." Young friend Fu is right. Chenhua and Su Chuanping had stood up long ago. Chenhua said, "This demonic god blood pool has changed greatly. The area of the blood pool seems to have increased a bit. When I came here earlier, the edge of the blood pool seemed to still be inside." Su Chuanping nodded. "It's probably the changes in the demonic god blood pool that attracted the attention of the Jing province's Chu clan. That's why they came here from so far away." Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and looked at the steam-like blood mist. His soul sense couldn't see the entirety of the demonic god blood pool, nor could it penetrate into the blood mist. There seemed to be a strange restriction in the blood mist. This restriction seemed to have a life of its own. As it slowly changed, it also devoured Xiao Hua's soul sense. Xiao Hua didn't dare act rashly. Moreover, after arriving here, Xiao Hua had the same feeling as when he heard about the blood pool of gods and devils from Fujiwen. Xiao Hua's heart really did give birth to a faint feeling. This feeling was very familiar to Xiao Hua, but when he thought about it carefully, it was also unfamiliar. It seemed to be a kind of summoning, but also a kind of vigilance. It was really difficult to grasp. In particular, Xiao Hua was still some distance away from the fiend god blood pool. He could smell the scent of the netherworld blood sea. Things are getting more and more interesting. Xiao Hua couldn't help but think to himself, "Who is it? Who dares to come to my Chu clan's forbidden area?" Just when Xiao Hua wanted to order Fujiwen to fly down, a divine sense swept over. Then, several clear eyes techniques swept over at the same time. An arrogant voice immediately sounded in everyone's ears. Xiao Hua raised his head and looked at the source of the voice. Several sword lights streaked across the sky. Several third-grade essence energy Confucian scholars wearing tight clothes flew over from the distance. The one in front had a long and narrow face like a red date. He was standing on a fiery red flying sword. Fellow immortal, Chenhua and Su Chuanping naturally couldn't let Xiao Hua go out to answer. The two flew out of the flying car and bowed. "I am Chenhua of Yangzhou's Sipping Mountain, Su Chuanping of Huiyu Villa. Behind I is Xiao Hua, Taoist Xiao, and his disciple. The four of us heard that the Chu clan was spreading the hero's invitation in the hidden, immortal continent. We came here to help the Chu clan." Humph. The person in front stopped. The several Confucian scholars behind him also stopped their sword lights. The red-faced Confucian scholar coldly snorted and said, "My Chu clan is spreading the hero's invitation in the hidden, immortal continent. We naturally welcome capable heroes. However, we may not welcome crooked melons and split dates who want to take advantage of the situation." Chenhua and Su Chuanping's faces instantly turned red. The two of them only had a cultivation of gold core. They weren't much stronger than these people. However, looking at these third-grade essence energy Confucian scholars patrolling back and forth, even if the two of them could enter the god-devil blood pool, what kind of advantage could they take? This Confucian scholar's words couldn't be considered wrong. -13. Chapter 3879. Just when Chenhua and Su Chuanping didn't know how to answer, "Humph, you're looking for a beating." Xiao Hua snorted coldly and then, "Woo!" A gust of wind suddenly swept between the two. "You dare!" The leading scholar suddenly cried out, and then, "Pa!" A loud slap was heard. Chen Zhua and Su Chuanping stared blankly as a blood-red palm print appeared on the scholar's face. "How dare you!" Behind the leading Confucian scholar, several other Confucian scholars shouted as they surrounded Xiao Hua's flying carriage with their sword lights. The other scholars thought that the red-faced scholar had been careless and had been ambushed, but the red-faced scholar understood very well. When he heard the other side's cold snort, he immediately urged his sword light to dodge, but a palm suddenly arrived in the gust of wind. That palm seemed to have blocked the entire world in front of him. Even if he wanted to dodge, he simply couldn't. The red-faced scholar stretched out his finger in surprise and cried out, "You!" He never thought that there would be such a powerful Taoist cultivator in the hidden immortal continent, who actually dared to slap him as soon as they met. But suddenly, the red-faced scholar thought of something and said in surprise, You're Xiao Hua? Blackwind Mountain's Xiao Hua? Taoist Master Xiao?" The several Chu family disciples naturally weren't as short-sighted as Chen Zhua and Su Chuanping. Previously, they just didn't think that Xiao Hua would appear so magnanimously. Now that they heard the red-faced scholar's cry and carefully looked at Xiao Hua's appearance, how could they not know that this was the legendary Taoist Xiao Hua who swallowed 100,000 immortal soldiers in one gulp? After each of them cried out in surprise and attacked, they were at a loss. Fortunately, the red-faced scholar's reaction was quite sharp. He hurriedly turned his head and sternly swept a glance at the few people, then promptly bowed and said, "Junior Chu Jing greets Taoist Master Xiao." Junior Chu Feng. How could the scholars surrounding Xiao Hua's flying carriage not know the pros and cons? They already understood Chu Jing's meaning and didn't dare to be negligent. They simultaneously bowed and said, "Greetings, Taoist Master Xiao." Xiao Hua faintly nodded and asked, "This old man can't be considered a hero. Now that this old man has come to the blood pool of gods and devils, can your Chu family welcome me?" Of course. Hearing this, the fear in his heart unconsciously gradually disappeared. He hurriedly said with a smile, "If Taoist Master Xiao can't be considered a hero, then no Taoist cultivator in the hidden immortal continent is a hero. My Chu family naturally welcomes Senior to participate in this event." Previously, this junior didn't recognize Taoist Master Xiao. To welcome, Taoist Master, Taoist to wait a moment, Taoist for a moment, this junior to ask my Mai personally to welcome the guest for guest to welcome for you too. For he didn't, teat, to send to send Taoist. To send, to send. Xiao Hua knew that his current identity was special, so he thought for a moment and nodded. "Feel free to send a message. However, let me remind you that you shouldn't have any other thoughts. I'm not even afraid of 100,000 immortal soldiers, so a mere pool of fiend gods might not be able to stop me." Yes, this junior understands. Chu Jing bit his lips. He was helpless against Xiao Hua's threat. Taoist Master Qing Su and the others had already spread Xiao Hua's name to the extreme. Moreover, in these tens of thousands of years, apart from the Grand Mist ancestor who dared to face the Immortal Palace and the Lane Temple, the other Taoist cultivators were not as powerful as Xiao Hua. 100,000 immortal soldiers and Taoist Master Qing Yuan were actually defeated by Xiao Hua. If he wasn't a Taoist cultivator, everyone would think he was a great demon of the demon race. One had to admit, rumors and barbarian words were sometimes really scary. Chu Jing turned to look at the disciple who was about to send a message and said solemnly, "Chu Feng, go back in person and report to Ancestor Master Chu. Ask him to come in person." Chu Feng was stunned. Seeing Chu Jing's expression, he immediately understood. He hurriedly saluted Xiao Hua respectfully and said, "Taoist Master Xiao, please wait a moment. This junior will ask Ancestor Master to come and welcome me." Xiao Hua unhappily nodded in agreement. These words sounded nice, but in fact, he was asking the Chu family's Ancestor Master to decide whether or not he dared to let him enter the God-fiend blood pool. This Ancestor Master Chu Jianjin was presumably a decisive figure in the God-fiend blood pool. Chu Feng hurriedly flew away. The Chu family disciples surrounding the flying car felt somewhat uneasy. Previously, they were prepared to besiege the flying car, but now they were scattered around Xiaohua, this fiend. How could they not feel afraid? Chu Jing's eyes turned. He endured the cold sweat that involuntarily appeared on his back and said in a low voice, "Senior, Chu Ming and the others still have to patrol. There's no harm in letting this junior accompany senior here. Go." Xiaohua secretly laughed and waved his hand. The several people hurriedly bowed and saluted as if relieved of a heavy burden. Xiaohua looked at their slightly panicked appearance and asked Chu Jing, "The Chu family has sent out invitations to find the God Fiend chest in the God Fiend blood pool. I wonder when it will start? How many immortal friends have come here?" Senior. When Chu Jing heard this, the sweat from before immediately appeared again. He said with a smile, "This junior is only a low-level disciple of the Chu family. I came to the God Fiend blood pool to patrol. This junior really doesn't know what senior is talking about." When Chu Jing said this, Xiaohua didn't feel anything, but Chunjua and Su Chuanping blushed with shame. They still wanted to come to the God Fiend blood pool to take advantage of it, but they didn't expect that the Chu family's third-level origin energy disciples could only be reduced to patrol. What could they do here? Xiaohua nodded and said, "Since you don't know these things, you should know how big the God Fiend blood pool is now and what changes there are in the periphery, right?" Yes, this junior naturally knows this. Chu Jing was originally a patrol. If he said that he didn't know this, it would be an excuse. Chu Jing naturally didn't dare and hurriedly replied, "The God Fiend blood pool originally had a circumference of 10,000 li. Now that it has changed, it has expanded to 13,000 li. As for what the change is, this junior isn't too clear. However, this junior knows that the God Fiend blood pool's surroundings were originally sparsely populated, but now that it has expanded another 3,000 li, hundreds of thousands of people were included. These people all turned into white bones overnight." See, Xiaohua sucked in a breath of cold air and said in shock, "So many living things?" Yes, Chu Jing also lamented. Not only were so many commoners killed in one night, even my Chu family's disciples were caught off guard and lost many. Hearing this, Xiaohua smiled and said meaningfully, "So your Chu family has been paying attention to the God Fiend blood pool for a long time." Oh, senior misunderstood. Chu Jing was slightly stunned and immediately understood. He said with a smile, "The God Fiend blood pool's change was only a matter of a month ago. At that time, my Chu family had already sent out invitations." A month ago? Xiaohua frowned and seemed to have understood something in his heart. He then asked, "Could it be the Night of 100 Ghosts? How did senior know?" Chu Jing was shocked, but his shock wasn't because Xiaohua accurately told him the time of the God Fiend blood pool's change, but because of a lingering fear. What's so difficult about that? Xiaohua said with a faint smile, "A month ago. Wasn't it around the 15th of the 7th month? Do you think it's possible that it was the Night of 100 Ghosts?" "Alas, it is indeed as senior said." Chu Jing sighed and said, "When my Chu family came to the God Fiend blood pool, the God Fiend blood pool had indeed changed a bit, but it was definitely not as terrifying as we had expected. That night, the blood pool suddenly surged. Not to mention the martial uncles who were exploring the blood pool. Even the disciples who were patrolling around the God Fiend blood pool suffered. Although this junior doesn't know exactly how many people of the Chu family died in the God Fiend blood pool, among the disciples who were patrolling with this junior that night, 10 of them were swallowed by the blood mist. This junior watched as they turned into white bones. Even you Chu family disciples couldn't escape, let alone those pitiful commoners." Xiaohua lowered his head and looked at the distant mountains and fields. Although there were still some beautiful outlines, there was an inexplicable dusk inside, and it was gradually becoming barren. "That's right," Chu Jing nodded. "Those commoners probably didn't even wake up from their sleep before." Speaking of this, a coughing sound came from afar. Chu Jing hurriedly stopped and turned his head to look, only to see a burly middle-aged man in a tight suit. There was an indescribable melancholy between his eyebrows as he flew over absent-mindedly. Martial ancestor Chu. Chu Jing didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly bowed. "You've come?" That middle-aged man flew over, indifferently swept a glance at Xiaohua and the others, and coldly asked, "You're Xiaohua?" Xiaohua looked at this man from head to toe, and a strange feeling emerged in his heart. The melancholy on this man's face was very obvious, and there was no need to say anything. Although the man's gaze was cold, Xiaohua could still read a kind of dissociation, a kind of sorrow, and a kind of despair from this gaze. "Yes, I'm Xiaohua." Xiaohua nodded, looked at this fourth-grade upper-rank Confucian cultivator, and replied, "Immortal friend, are you Chu Jianjin?" "Oh," Chu Jing hurriedly explained, "Taoist Xiao, this is martial ancestor Chu Yang, my Chu family's great deacon. Martial ancestor Chu Jianjin is my Chu family's steward. Presumably, there are many seniors in the God-fiend blood pool now. He doesn't have time to come over." Actually, there was no need for Chu Jing to explain. Xiaohua already understood Chu Jianjin's arrangement. It wasn't that the Chu family was deliberately being disrespectful. If they were, the Chu family wouldn't have needed Chu Yang to come over to welcome him. The Chu family was still willing to let Xiaohua come to the God-fiend blood pool, and even had the intention to further contact him, which was why they sent Chu Yang, a great deacon second only to Chu Jianjin, to welcome him. If the Immortal Palace wanted to pursue this matter in the future, the Chu family would also have room to maneuver. Of course, if there was really the worst outcome, this Chu Yang would naturally be the scapegoat that the Chu family needed to sacrifice. -13. Chapter 3880. Xiaohua would never make things difficult for a scapegoat like Chu Yang. He smiled and cupped his hands. "Xiaohua greets Deacon Chu." Although Xiaohua's etiquette was thorough, Chu Yang was not moved. He raised his hand slightly and said, "Come with me." Seeing Chu Yang like this, Xiaohua frowned and said indifferently, "Where is Deacon Chu taking me?" Chu Yang glanced at Xiaohua. His expression was still indifferent. He turned to Chu Jing and said, "Chu Jing, tell Taoist Xiao about my Chu clan's arrangements." "Yes, Grandmaster." Chu Jing agreed and explained to Xiaohua, "Taoist Xiao, you should know that during this period of time, many cultivators have come to the blood pool of gods and devils. My Chu clan doesn't have many disciples to receive them. My Chu clan has a special place to receive the seniors who have been personally invited by my Chu clan's disciples. And for the seniors who don't have a token, my Chu clan also has a place to receive them. But the conditions may be a bit poor." Seeing that Chu Jing didn't dare to say anything, Chu Yang glared at him and said, "There are many cultivators who have come to the blood pool of gods and devils. There are Confucian cultivators, Buddhist disciples, and Taoist cultivators. In order to not cause any disputes, my Chu clan has also arranged for Buddhist disciples and Taoist cultivators who don't have tokens to other places." Hearing this, Xiaohua was a bit displeased. Although his temperament was tranquil and he didn't like fame, he also didn't want to be evaded like this. He originally didn't want to come to the blood pool of gods and devils to join in the fun. But after hearing Song Zixiang and Zhu Cheng's words, he felt that it was reasonable and came over. But he didn't expect that even the patrolling disciples of the Chu clan had a cultivation of third-grade essence energy. This great deacon in front of him was actually an upper fourth-grade essence energy. If a fourth-grade Confucian clan was already like this, then what about second-grade and third-grade clans? The strength of a fifth-grade elemental force that he had displayed was probably not even worthy of their attention. Why would he stick his warm face to their cold butts for no reason? Never mind. Xiaohua waved his hand. Just as he was about to speak, ding ding dong dong, a burst of musical instruments rang out. Everyone looked up and saw that on the left side of the sky, a white cloud with a faint pink color was surging over like a tide. On the cloud, there were several rocks that were nearly 100 zhang in size, pulling a large boat over. The sound of the musical instruments came from the large boat. The large boat was flying very fast, but in a moment, it was already close. Xiaohua and the others could clearly see that there was a beautiful lily engraved on the large boat. This lily was shining with a pink brilliance. Countless noble qi came from all directions and rushed into this lily. A majestic and quiet atmosphere was born from this lily, making people feel respect in their hearts. Lilies? Xiaohua frowned slightly, as if he had thought of something. Sure enough, Chu Yang, who was still somewhat absent-minded, looked at the large boat with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He whispered, "Morong clan? Why would they come to the demon god blood pool?" Hearing the words Morong clan, Xiao Hua naturally thought of Murong Tsongyun, the mysterious woman that he had only heard of in Star-Picking Pavilion. Actually, until now, Xiao Hua still didn't understand Murong Tsongyun's cultivation. He also didn't understand why Murong Tsongyun withdrew from the bidding for the Pegasus. When the large boat of the Murong clan appeared, the originally quiet surroundings of the demon god blood pool suddenly became lively. Many patrolling disciples, who were dressed like Chu Jing, flew over from afar. Some cultivators also flew out from the restriction on the ground. On the other side of the demon god blood pool, several sword lights whistled and rushed to the front of the crowd. When the sword lights appeared, 3 middle-aged Confucian cultivators with 6th-level cultivation appeared. The one in front had a slightly bulging forehead and bright eyes. He stood in midair like a flying sword. Xiao Hua originally wanted to leave, but at this moment, a few Chu clan disciples were standing in the air. Although they weren't densely packed, they were clearly a kind of support. Seeing Chu Yang and Chu Jing standing with their hands behind their backs and faces full of respect, Xiao Hua knew that it wasn't a good time to leave, so he simply landed on the flying carriage and sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. He would wait for the Murong clan's large boat to land. The Murong clan's flying boat approached, and the surging aura became increasingly dense. This aura was like a mountain that covered the entire side of the demon god blood pool. Even Xiao Hua, who was sitting on the flying carriage, felt as if a large stone was pressing down on his heart. He couldn't breathe, not to mention the Chu clan disciples who were only 3rd-level cultivators. Each and every one of them trembled in midair, trying their best not to fall from the sky. Sigh, Xiao Hua frowned slightly and sighed in his heart. He knew that this was a kind of honor for the Murong clan, a 1st-grade aristocratic family, and a kind of top-down view for the Chu clan, a 4th-grade aristocratic family. I really don't know what the situation will be like when a 1st-grade aristocratic family's flying boat appears. Seeing that the flying boat had stopped, rosy clouds gushed out from both sides of the boat. The entire front of the flying boat began to turn transparent, and a few women dressed in palace attire holding musical instruments such as zither, chimes, and pipa flew out on colorful clouds. The 3 Confucian cultivators hurriedly went forward and bowed. Juniors Chu Jianjin, Chu Hong, and Chu Pingjing greet Senior Murong. Juniors didn't know that Senior was coming, so we didn't greet you. We were really negligent. In, get up. A very lazy voice came from the flying boat. This old man didn't greet Brother Yoji and came uninvited, so I can't blame you all. Senior, please know that our clan head didn't come to the demon god blood pool. The one in charge today is Martial Uncle Zhongyu. Chu Jianjin respectfully replied. Oh, so it's Brother Zhongyu. That person still didn't show himself. This old man hasn't seen him for 40 years. As he spoke, 2 eyes that seemed to be able to see through everything fell from the flying boat. They swept through every part of the demon god blood pool faster than divine sense. Senior. Seeing this, Chu Jianjin hurriedly smiled and said, Martial Uncle Zhongyu isn't here right now. According to the message, he will come in 10 days. If Senior is in a hurry, this Junior will send a message to Martial Uncle. No need. Following this voice, a young man with a face as white as jade wearing a brocade robe and a jade crown appeared from the flying boat. This young man's face was covered in a layer of light purple divine light, making him look very luxurious. Following the young man was a tall woman. This woman wore a pink robe, and her face was also as white as jade with a faint red halo. Her bright eyes and white teeth made her look like a peach blossom from afar. This old man just happened to pass by and heard that the Chu clan was doing something in the demon god blood pool, so I came to take a look. I have no intention of disturbing the Chu clan, so there's no need to inform them. The young man's figure flew and landed in front of the flying boat. His eyes flashed with multicolored light as he looked at the demon god blood pool with interest. Yes, this junior understands. Chu Jianjin replied in a low voice. He didn't dare say anything else and stood there respectfully. After a while, the young man raised his head and the light in his eyes disappeared. He looked at Chu Jianjin and smiled. Your Chu clan is really generous. It seems you've been paying attention to the demon god blood pool for a long time, right? This is just a small trick. Senior, please don't laugh at us. Chu Jianjin smiled apologetically. Compared to the Murong clan, My Chu clan is really insignificant? Speaking of the demon god chess, the corner of the young man's mouth revealed a trace of a smile. This old man has long heard of it. Now that I have the chance to see its true appearance, this old man can't help but want to stay and take a look. Chu Jianjin's expression slightly changed. Then he smiled and said, if Senior wants to take a look, we'll find the demon god chest in the demon god blood pool and report to the clan head. We'll definitely send the chest to Senior's residence. What? You don't want me to stay? The young man's expression became cold as if he was a bit angry. Chu Jianjin hurriedly said, of course not. Senior misunderstood. Senior is a void refinement and heavenly fusion grandmaster. The demon god blood pool is a dragon's pool and a tiger's den in our eyes, but in your eyes, it's only a blood field. My Chu clan can't wait to welcome Senior's help. How could we not want Senior to stay? Actually, if we knew Senior would come, why would our Chu clan spend so much effort to send out invitations on the hidden immortal continent? Haha. The young man laughed and pointed at Chu Jianjin. You little child, what kind of person do you think this old man is? How could I compete with you juniors for the demon god chess? If I make a move, won't Chu Yun scold me to death in the future? Fine, fine, fine. Since the demon god blood pool is so heavily guarded, I can't even see what's going on. Why would I stay here? Seventh granduncle. Just as the young man waved his sleeves and was about to turn around, the woman beside him said in a low voice, Yun wants to stay here and watch the show. The woman's voice wasn't loud, but no one in the sky dared to make a ruckus. Although Xiaohua wasn't close, he could still hear everything clearly. Isn't this Murong Tsongyan that he saw in Star Picking Tower a long time ago? What's there to see here? The young man was a bit shocked and asked curiously, it's just some blood and devil chi. Now there's also some underworldine chi. It's true that there are ghosts in this place, but how could there be a demon god chess? Moreover, if there was a demon god chess, how could it be our Chu clan's turn? Granduncle. Murong Tsongyun pulled the young man's sleeve and said coquettishly, Yun cultivated to the master realm with great difficulty. If I go back this time, Father will definitely make Yun go into seclusion to break through the bottleneck of chi refinement and spirit return. In the future, I won't be able to go out so easily. Just agree to Yun. No. The young man decisively refused and said indifferently, if it was somewhere else, this old man would agree. But this place is a place where 10,000 years of Yin spirits have settled down. The Yin chi and evil chi are very heavy. It's not appropriate for a little girl like you to stay here. Not only will it affect your newly cultivated realm, it will also be detrimental to your future cultivation. Granduncle. Murong Tsongyun still didn't give up and begged, if you're worried, can't you leave 2 martial uncles to accompany Yuner? Moreover, Yuner has old friends here. -13. Chapter 3881. Oh. A trace of surprise appeared on the young man's face. He looked at Murong Tsongyun in confusion and asked curiously, which old friend of yours is here? Is he a disciple of the Chu clan? Murong Tsongyun blushed slightly and said with a smile, Granduncle, what are you thinking about? This old friend of mine was just a few decades ago when Yun hadn't broken through yet. I made friends with him during my travels. He has never seen Yun's true appearance. Oh? The young man seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Xiaohua's Pegasus in the distance and said with a smile, this old man remembers. Back then, you said that you wanted to give this old man a Pegasus. Presumably, this is it? As he spoke, the young man raised his hand. A wave of awe-inspiring chi suddenly gushed out from Xiaohua's surroundings. It was as if a large hand was grabbing the Pegasus. Although there was a lot of awe-inspiring chi, it accurately separated the flying carriage from the Pegasus. It only pulled the Pegasus towards the young man. The flying carriage didn't move at all. The Pegasus was wrapped in the awe-inspiring chi. It hurriedly flapped its wings, but unfortunately, it couldn't make any waves. The Pegasus panicked. The horn on its forehead began to spin with brilliance. Senior, what are you doing? Xiaohua's indifferent voice came from the flying carriage. Are you bullying the weak and forcefully taking my Pegasus? Following Xiaohua's words, 9 sword lights shot out from the flying chariot and rushed into the awe-inspiring aura like 9 fish. In the blink of an eye, the 9 sword lights flashed and protected the Pegasus. Clang! A loud sword cry came from the awe-inspiring aura. The dazzling sword lights actually made a big hole in the awe-inspiring aura that was holding the Pegasus. Harumph! The Pegasus was overjoyed. It neighed and flapped its light feathers. It turned into a stream of light and flew out of the big hole. Huh! The young man's move was naturally more casual, but he didn't expect Xiaohua to break the restriction. He couldn't help but snort. However, when he saw Xiaohua, who was wearing a Taoist robe, he was even more surprised. Xiaohua? Suddenly, the young man seemed to think of something and whispered, "He's Xiaohua from Blackwind Mountain? Yuaner, is this the old friend you were talking about?" "Hee, that's right, 7th granduncle." Murong Tsongyun smiled and said, "He's the Xiaohua that Yuaner met in Yu Province's Bronze Pillar Nation's star-picking tower." Yuaner didn't expect that the unknown Xiaohua would become the famous Xiaohua of the Dao sect. If Yuaner hadn't seen the image in the jade eyes, Yuaner wouldn't have believed it. "I see. I didn't expect you to have some sort of relationship with him." The young man looked at Murong Tsongyun meaningfully, as if he finally understood why she wanted to stay here. "You, come here." The young man raised his head to look at Xiaohua and called out without any trace of politeness. Xiaohua stood on top of the flying carriage and saw that the young man's gaze was like a sharp sword that could pierce through him. He knew that this young man was just as Chu Jianjun said. Although he was a great grandmaster, this great grandmaster was a void fusion stage great grandmaster. He was only half a step away from stepping into the realm of sage of literature. In terms of strength, he should be above the 7th level of origin energy, far from what Xiaohua could compare to. Xiaohua thought for a moment, then moved his body and slowly flew in front of the young man. He bowed and said, "Junior Xiaohua greets Senior Murong. You're that Xiaohua of the Dao sect?" The young man asked. His eyes flashed with a 5-colored brilliance as he looked at Xiaohua. He was slightly surprised in his heart. At this moment, Xiaohua's heart moved. He knew that this was an opportunity. He nodded and said, "Yes, Junior is that Xiaohua." The young man didn't say anything. Suddenly, he raised his right hand and bent his 5 fingers. The awe-inspiring qi in the vicinity of several li was suddenly sucked out. Even in Xiaohua's eyes, all the brilliance and scenery within a dozen li were grasped by the young man's hand. Woo! Following a muffled sound that sounded like a water buffalo mooing, the young man's fist instantly streaked across the air and hit Xiaohua's chest. Not good. Xiaohua felt an indescribable suffocation. He even felt a flash of light and shadow. Xiaohua was greatly alarmed. The Zhen Yuan in his body instantly surged, and his entire body rapidly retreated. Xiaohua was originally an expert in escape techniques. Even if he encountered an opponent of a higher level, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Xiaohua's wind escape technique could also be considered to have reached the middle level. However, the young man's fist was really too fast. Xiaohua's body had just moved when the fist had already hit Xiaohua's body. A huge force was transmitted from the fist. A seemingly endless awe-inspiring qi also violently rushed into Xiaohua's body. The protective Zhen qi around Xiaohua's body was shattered. Xiaohua's figure fell to the ground like a meteorite. However, although the awe-inspiring qi was powerful and the awe-inspiring crystal threads were sharp, they only rushed into Xiaohua's body for a few inches. They were immediately blocked by Xiaohua's powerful body. What was special was that when Xiaohua activated the sword qi around his body, the sword qi rushed out from the surface of his body. The awe-inspiring qi that could destroy a mountain peak was also blocked by Xiaohua's sword qi. Damn it, too fast. Xiaohua's body flashed with intense brilliance. His figure fell rapidly, but he was still amazed in his heart. Not to mention this distance of several zhang. Even if it was a few li, his fist would still arrive in a flash. The literary sage is really the literary sage. Xiaohua was like a meteorite. Not only was there a brilliance around his body, but there was also a strange whistling sound. There was even some mist faintly coming out from the brilliance. Boom! With a loud sound, Xiaohua's figure crashed into the ground. The entire ground shook violently, and a deep pit of several zhang in size appeared on the ground. Seeing that Xiaohua was hit by him without any power to fight back and crashed into the ground as he expected, the young man's expression didn't change. However, after a moment, the sword qi on Xiaohua's body was like a hedgehog, dissolving his power. Even under the clear eyes technique, he didn't see Xiaohua injured. The young man couldn't help but be surprised. He whispered, "Huh? This little kid is a bit strange." Seventh granduncle, Murong Songyun saw the young man make a move and was slightly startled. She hurriedly whispered, "Xiaohua is just." Before she could finish speaking, shua, like a gust of wind, Xiaohua's figure suddenly flew out from the ground and landed in front of her. Although he looked a bit embarrassed, it was enough to shock Murong Songyun. You're actually fine?" Murong Songyun asked in surprise. He hurriedly checked Xiaohua's injuries. "Many thanks for Senior's mercy." Xiaohua bowed to the young man and then nodded to Murong Songyun with a smile. "Many thanks for Miss Murong's concern. Senior Murong only wanted to test my strength. If he really wanted to make a move, how could I be here talking to Miss?" The young man saw that Xiaohua was so relaxed and narrowed his eyes. He thoughtfully nodded and said, "Black Wind Mountain's Xiaohua actually knows the sword qi of us Confucian cultivators. This is not only beyond this old man's expectations, but also beyond the Immortal Palace's expectations." Xiaohua smiled and took advantage of the situation to respectfully say, "It's not that Junior didn't want to reveal my Confucian cultivation. It's just that the Immortal Palace is too overbearing. They didn't give Junior a chance to speak at all. Not only did they set up an inescapable net, they even clamored for Junior to cripple his own cultivation and accept his punishment with the Immortal Palace. If it was a powerful expert like Senior, Junior naturally wouldn't dare to resist. But facing the immortal generals of the Immortal Palace, how could Junior just stand there and wait to be captured? Before Junior could use the sword qi of Confucian cultivators, they collapsed. Even if Junior wanted to let the Immortal Palace know that Junior has the sword qi of Confucian cultivators, I'm afraid Junior doesn't have the chance. Haha, little child, you're right. The young man laughed. The Immortal Palace is used to being bossy and domineering. How could they talk to you nicely? Since you can take a punch from this old man and come out unscathed, that bullshit true monarch Qing is nothing more than a loyal lackey of the Immortal Emperor. Speaking of strength, how could he be your opponent? Xiaohua modestly said, Junior is just a lonely duckweed in the hidden immortal continent. How could Junior dare to compare with the great general of the Sun Palace? Forget it. This old man is Murong Jiang. Remember this. The young man waved his hand and said with a smile, Nowadays, it's rare to have a cultivator like you who's proficient in both Taoism and Confucianism on the hidden immortal continent. Today, I have something to do, so I won't stay here for long. When Yun returns to the Murong family, you can come with him. This old man is very optimistic about you. Is that so? Xiaohua's face lit up. He bowed and said, Junior thanks Senior Murong. Haha. While Murong Jiang was laughing, his figure flashed in the air. While his voice and smiling face were still in the air, Murong Jiang's figure had already landed on the big boat. Looking at the palace maid and the boy who flew out earlier, they once again played their musical instruments and flew towards the big boat. Seeing that everyone from the Murong family had boarded the big boat, leaving only Murong Songyun behind, Xiaohua understood that this was Murong Jiang's real test for him. If he could protect Murong Songyun in the blood pool of gods and devils, he would be able to obtain the protection of the Murong family. However, what surprised Xiaohua was that Murong Songyun's face slightly changed. When he saluted the big boat, his lips actually moved slightly, as if he was sending a sound transmission. If Xiaohua wasn't very close to Murong Songyun, he might not have noticed this change in expression. Sure enough, after Murong Songyun saluted, another figure flew down from the big boat. It was an old man. 14th uncle. Murong Songyun greeted with a smile. Thank you for accompanying Yuner here. Humph, you only know how to cause trouble. The old man glared at Murong Songyun as if he was scolding him. However, his expression didn't seem like one. Xiaohua helplessly saluted again and said, Junior Xiaohua greets Senior. And, get up. This old man is Murong Junpeng. I am Yuan'er's uncle. After the old man finished scolding Morong Tsongyun, he turned to Xiao Hua and said, this old man has also heard of nephew Zhao's fame of killing the immortal soldiers of the immortal palace. It is indeed satisfying. -13. Chapter 3882. Morong Junpeng looked around and activated the paperweight to open the door. He looked at Xiao Hua and smiled. If nephew Xiao doesn't mind, why don't you come with us? This old man may have some matters to discuss with you. Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand and said, although Senior Morong asked me to protect Miss Morong, with Senior here, there is no need for me to do anything. I will ask the Chu family to set up a small pavilion. If Senior needs anything, feel free to inform me. And Morong Junpeng didn't force him. He glanced at Morong Tsongyun and flew into the pavilion. Morong Tsongyun smiled sweetly at Xiao Hua and also flew in. Soon after, Xiao Hua called over 2 Chu clan disciples and also set up a small pavilion. Then, he also flew inside. This was a very exquisite pavilion, no different from the usual ones. However, there were faint flashes of dark clouds everywhere in this pavilion, and inscriptions were faintly discernible. Xiao Hua sat in the main hall and looked around. He didn't find anything strange, but he still cautiously took out a jade talisman and set up a simple formation. He then sat on a chair and frowned. Master. After a while, Fu Jiwen said in a low voice, do you really want the Morong family's protection? If not, you must tell them as soon as possible, otherwise there will be endless troubles. Fu Jiwen knew that his master's cultivation was unfathomable, but sometimes he didn't understand the rules of the hidden immortal continent, so he reminded him in a low voice. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Do you think I want to rely on the Morong family? Do I need to rely on the Morong family? That's true. Fu Jiwen nodded. But master, if you don't plan to do so, you must tell Morong Tsongyun as soon as possible. Otherwise, if the Morong family misunderstands, it will be difficult for master. The immortal palace is in charge of Confucian affairs, so they might not put master in their eyes, but the Morong family won't. If they get angry, they will definitely keep an eye on master. Not only will it be difficult for master to continue cultivating, the Fortune Gates matters will also be leaked. At that time, it will be a disaster. AI, do you think master is willing? Xiao Hua bitterly smiled. This Morong family suddenly appeared, and Morong Tsongyun also recognized master's Pegasus. Who knows what she was thinking, insisting on master staying behind, especially that Morong Jiang. The moment they met, he immediately tried to probe. He was a 7th level Origin Energy Grandmaster, half a step away from becoming a sage of literature. Since master wanted to form alliances, he naturally had to make friends with such an expert. But who would have thought that he would actually want me to follow Morong Tsongyun back to the Morong family? This kind of obvious solicitation. I don't dare to reject him in front of his face. Looks like we can only take one step at a time. Of course, Fu Jiwen also knew Xiao Hua's awkwardness, so he smiled and said, maybe Marshal Uncle Morong has a good impression of master. Tisk, would you even believe what you just said? Xiao Hua sneered. You're just a little son of the Fu family, yet you have to think for the Fu family. Morong Tsongyun's marriage is something she can decide on her own? Hee, that's true. Fu Jiwen smiled cheekily. Why don't we elope? Since master has already offended the immortal palace, there's no need to be afraid of offending the Morong family. Wouldn't it be easy to leave the hidden immortal continent and fly away together? Pa. Xiao Hua angrily hit Fu Jiwen's head and scolded. Why don't you elope with Bien? It's not that Disciple doesn't want to, but Disciple doesn't have the ability to attract bees and butterflies. Just seeing Disciple once is enough to make people think of Disciple. Fu Jiwen replied in a serious manner, but his words were not serious at all. Xiao Hua angrily said, how can there be such a shameless disciple who dares to talk to master like that? Do you still want to cultivate or not? Yes, disciple was wrong. Fu Jiwen hurriedly pulled a long face. Humph, you still know that you were wrong? Xiao Hua was even more annoyed. He coldly snorted and said, do you think that Morong Tsongyun calling me master is a good thing? Why do I feel that there's something strange about it? Yes, disciple also thinks so. Fujiwen obviously didn't see the change in Murong Tsungyun's expression. He was just being perfunctory. No, how can Master allow himself to be captured without putting up a fight? It's better to take the initiative. Xiaohua promptly stood up from his seat and said, Master is going out for a walk. Are you coming with Master? Or do you want to return to the Kunlun mirror to cultivate? Disciple is naturally willing to return to the Kunlun mirror to cultivate, Fujiwen said with a smile. Although Disciple's cultivation is higher than Lu Yi and the others, these junior brothers are all abnormal. Disciple also wants to make the best use of his time. Xiaohua knew that his disciples were all gifted. Not to mention that Wu Tian was stronger than Fujiwen. Even Chang Yuan and Yu Zhongquan's cultivation wasn't too far off from Fujiwen's. Lu Yi, Wang Bianfei, and Yuanya couldn't compare to Fujiwen, but the three of them had endless potential. Now, they were like dragons trapped in the sea. Their cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. As long as Fujiwen slacked off, in less than 100 years, the three of them would surpass Fujiwen. Forget it. Go back and cultivate, Xiaohua said with a smile. This place is indeed dangerous. Wait for Master to go out and call you out. After sending Fujiwen back to the space, Xiaohua walked out of the pavilion and called the disciples of the Chu family to ask them. After confirming that there were no obstructions within the restriction, he slowly flew towards the demonic god's blood pool. After flying for a while, Xiaohua stopped in midair. The closer he got to the demonic god's blood pool, the more powerful the pressure on his mind became. The feeling that originally attracted Xiaohua gradually weakened. The blood sea that was only 10,000 li away seemed to be endless under this pressure. A feeling of being an ant involuntarily emerged in his heart. What is this blood sea? Looking at the engraved blood traces that were constantly changing, Xiaohua knew that the raging waves in the blood sea were far from what he had imagined. Xiaohua couldn't help but ponder, if it's the Netherworld's blood sea, then it doesn't have the Netherworld's chi. If it's something from the demon realm, then it also doesn't have the demon realm's chi. However, whether it's the Netherworld's chi or the demon realm's chi, this Xiao should be able to sense it. In particular, according to the disciples of the Chu family, the demonic god's blood pool had a strange change a month ago because of the 100 Ghosts parade. If I say that it has nothing to do with the Netherworld's chi, who would believe me? Thinking, Xiaohua urged his figure to fly along the edge of the demonic god's blood pool, then continued to fly forward. Within the Chu family's barrier, there were many pavilions, but the demonic god's blood pool's aura was very strong, so there weren't many cultivators moving around within the barrier. Even if there were some Confucian cultivators who came out to explore like Xiaohua, when these people saw Xiaohua, they all avoided him and were unwilling to meet face-to-face with him. After flying for a while, Xiaohua saw that there really wasn't anything special. The barrier of the demonic god's blood pool was very firm and he couldn't see any flaws. Just as he was about to return, on a protruding cliff, Xiaohua saw an unfamiliar person sitting there blankly, staring at the demonic god's blood pool in front of him. He didn't know what he was thinking. Wasn't this person the head deacon Chu Yang who had greeted Xiaohua before? Xiaohua looked around and didn't see any disciples of the Chu family. There weren't even any pavilions in the surroundings. Xiaohua followed Chu Yang's gaze and stared at the demonic god's blood pool for a long time, but he still didn't see any clues. After thinking for a while, Xiaohua flew up the cliff and stood on the left side. He cupped his hands and said, "Immortal friend Chu, this Xiao greets you." Who would have thought that Chu Yang didn't seem to hear him and only looked at the demonic god's blood pool without replying? Xiaohua also felt strange, so he simply stood there and looked at the demonic god's blood pool. The waves of blood in the demonic god's blood pool were still the same as before, wantonly fluttering and swaying at will, without any rules or direction. Strands of black flames that suddenly appeared also didn't have any fixed trajectory. They suddenly appeared along with the waves of blood, then were extinguished by the waves of blood. One after another, they seemed to be endless. Perhaps after half an hour, Chu Yang suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Do you think this demonic god's blood pool is living happily?" What? Xiaohua was stunned. He almost doubted his own ears and blurted out this question. This black chi wave is obviously different from the demonic god's blood pool. So why did it desperately appear and mix with the demonic god's blood pool? In just a few breaths, The demonic god's blood pool was extinguished and disappeared. You say, in this short period of time, what do you think it wants? Xiao Hua touched his nose and asked very strangely, this Xiao isn't a demonic god's blood pool, nor is it black qi. I'm afraid it's not easy to guess what they're thinking. If you want to know, you can go in and ask. You're right. Guessing outside, in the end, it's just guessing and not the truth. The most important thing is to go in and ask. Chu Yang muttered almost to himself. Xiao Hua looked at this very strange person and smiled as he cupped his hands and said, this Xiao won't delay a mortal friend Chu's enlightenment any longer. Goodbye. But at this moment, Chu Yang asked very abruptly, then, what do you think people live for? Xiao Hua was slightly stunned and stood there blankly for a moment. This sentence was like a bolt of lightning that struck him. Yes, what do people live for? Xiao Hua muttered to himself, but his heart was like a raging sea. From time to time, some strange scenes would appear in his mind. It was as if Xiao Hua had also thought about this question before, or perhaps these scenes were some of Xiao Hua's memories from before. Of course, at this moment, Xiao Hua's primordial spirit was very strong. He was comprehending the heavenly Tao and also comprehending karma. He was cultivating Taoist techniques and also familiar with scriptures. His chest was filled with an awe-inspiring aura, and his blood also refined a strange demonic aura. He wouldn't be stumped by this extremely simple question even though it was full of philosophy. However, he still took a deep breath and said to this Chu clan disciple in front of him who had a whole new level of respect, perhaps I don't know why other people live. However, this Xiao is well aware of the reason why I'm alive. Oh? Chu Yang rolled his eyes and looked at Xiao Hua. His eyes were still flickering with doubt. What do you live for? -13. Chapter 3883. I live so that some people can live better lives. Xiao Hua said word by word. My life was saved by the person I love, and also by the person who cares about me. I live so that I won't let their deaths down. If I live, they will have a chance to live. If I die, they won't live either. If I live, I can let more people live. Let them see the sun tomorrow. Let them eat food to fill their stomachs. You live really nobly, really great. Chu Yang's eyes flashed with a trace of ridicule. I don't know how many sanctimonious people have said these words. But after these people said these words, they turned around and did something that angered both men and gods, and did something that offended the heavens and reason. Maybe others do, but I don't. Although Xiao Hua didn't know why Chu Yang said this, he still answered sincerely, if you just think like this, what sunlight is there in this world? What is there to be reluctant to leave in this world? Yes, I just feel that there is nothing in this world to be reluctant to leave. Chu Yang nodded and looked at Shuizhe again. It can't be. Xiao Hua stared blankly, sizing up Chu Yang from head to toe. He didn't quite understand. No matter what, this Chu Yang was still a grandmaster who was around the 4th level of elemental energy. Since he had cultivated to such a level, how could he have such an outrageous idea? What Immortal Chu said is really ridiculous. Xiao Hua said with a smile, since the day we started cultivating, we were under the control of Confucian cultivators. Every time we made some progress in cultivation, we would be persecuted by Confucian cultivators. We went through a lot of trouble to cultivate to the Yuanying level, but in the end, we were still killed by the Immortal Palace. We didn't even complain about such a tragic fate. Every day, we had to work hard to gather energy into our bodies, refine our meridians, and raise our babies. Immortal Chu Yang was born in a Confucian family, and you had cultivation methods, medicinal pills, and Confucian classics. You were more than 100 times more fortunate than us Taoist cultivators. What are you doubting? My pain isn't your pain. How do you know? Chu Yang replied indifferently. These words made Xiao Hua choke. However, Xiao Hua thought for a moment and still said, a mayfly's life is born at sunrise and dies at sunset. Although it's short, it's still a walk in the world. Since one would leave a mark in this world, then the 6 paths reincarnation would surely record it as well. I might not know what a mayfly can do in its lifetime, but since humans can live longer than mayflies, why can't humans do more? People of the secular world gave birth to children, opened up wastelands, and farmed. They were either mediocre, or their names were passed down through the ages. They were still alive. Being alive might not have any meaning, but if they were not alive, then there was no meaning at all. Since we can set foot on the path of cultivation and become cultivators, let alone Confucian cultivators, Taoist sects, and Buddhist sects, they all have their own divine abilities. These divine abilities are not for showing off or showing off, but to let us live better, to let us use these divine abilities, to let others live better. Although Xiaohua's eloquence was not as good as Confucian cultivator Xiaohua's or Buddha Bodhi's, he was still able to talk nonstop. However, no matter how much Xiaohua said, Chu Yang was still indifferent. He looked at the blood waves indifferently and did not say another word. Forget it. Xiaohua said a lot and felt his mouth and tongue dry. He stopped and said, I'm afraid it's not easy for me to explain this profound truth of life. If fate allows it in the future, I'll ask a senior monk of Buddhist sects to explain it to you. No need. Chu Yang did not turn his head and said in a low voice, in my life, other than my parents who patiently explained these things to me, no one else could explain this question so deeply. It's not a coincidence that you could cultivate to such a level. Moreover, I also believe that your future prospects are incomparably brilliant. While they were talking, a palm-sized flying crane landed from a distance and stopped right next to Xiaohua. Chu Yang turned his head and looked at the lilies on the flying crane. He said, Miss Morong is calling you. You should go quickly. If you're interested, come here 3 days later at this time. I'll tell you some secrets. Okay. Xiaohua grabbed the flying crane and opened it to take a look. He nodded and said, I'll definitely come at that time. Xiaohua flew away. Chu Yang still did not move. He stood there like a senior monk meditating. There are strange people every year, but there are especially many this year. Xiaohua laughed secretly while flying. If this question was asked by a 10 or 20-year-old youth, it would be understandable. This Chu Yang has lived for who knows how many years. Why is he still distressed over this? This is really unimaginable. Could it be that this Chu Yang has some unknown pain and secret? Thinking about this, Xiaohua unconsciously looked forward to the appointment 3 days later. The palace that Morong Junpeng and Morong Tsongyun were in was very eye-catching. Xiaohua found it without much effort. After entering the palace, he found out that the Chu family had sent the Jade Eye Scroll over while he was away. Inside it was a detailed record of the plan to find the demon god chest in the demonic god blood pool. Of course, there were some details, but all of them were just guesses. They could only be used as a reference. Xiaohua removed the jade eyes from his forehead and handed it back to Morong Tsongyun. He said, When I came here before, I had some thoughts. But since Senior Morong has entrusted me with this task, I will definitely put Miss Morong's safety first. I don't care about these details. Haha, Xiaohua. Morong Junpeng was very satisfied with Xiaohua's words. He smiled and said, This time, the Chu clan is looking for the demon chest in the god and devil blood pool with great fanfare. Not to mention that the demon chest is only an imperial weapon, it can at most be considered one of the top 10 imperial weapons. And these 10 imperial weapons are nothing but a joke in the eyes of scholarly cultivator clans like us. Therefore, there are many scholarly cultivators coming to the god and devil blood pool, but there are very few 4th class and above disciples. 7th granduncle came here purely out of curiosity. He didn't have any intention of interfering. Yun didn't stay here to cause trouble. Rather, 7th granduncle found something strange after looking at the god and devil blood pool, so he let Yun stay. Of course, 7th granduncle also saw that your skills were extraordinary, so he took advantage of the situation to let you protect Yun. Therefore, although these details aren't important, we still have to pay attention to them and carefully deal with them. Only then can we expose the Chu clan's cover-up. Xiaohua was shocked. He finally understood the change in expression on Morong Tsongyun's face. There were so many secrets behind this. Xiaohua bitterly smiled and said, Senior, isn't this forcing a duck onto a perch? Junior really didn't think so much. Since Senior Morong wants to investigate, why don't you sneak into the god and devil blood pool and take a look? Making us come, how can it be as convenient as him? You think 7th granduncle doesn't want to? You think I'm willing to take the risk? Morong Tsongyun curled his lips and said, This god and devil blood pool is now covered by the Chu clan's formation. If 7th granduncle enters, he will inevitably be discovered by the Chu clan. Moreover, the god and devil blood pool itself is extremely powerful. Even with 7th granduncle's ability, he doesn't dare to take the risk. 7th granduncle saw that your Taoist body tempering technique is very powerful, so he let you stay here with the excuse of protecting me. Protecting me is secondary. Finding out the truth is the most important. Xiaohua's mouth was somewhat bitter. He had guessed a lot before, but he didn't expect that the reality was even more bizarre than his guesses. The Chu clan's true goal of finding treasures in the god and devil blood pool was far from what he could achieve. After thinking for a while, Xiaohua said, "Sai, Senior Murong really thinks too highly of me. Although I'm a Taoist body cultivator, how can it be compared to Senior's void fusion stage sub-body?" Yun already told 7th granduncle about this situation. Otherwise, 7th granduncle wouldn't have let me come. Murong Junpeng said with a smile, "What 7th granduncle means is that you just have to do your best. Regardless of success or failure, this is a merit. 7th granduncle can also speak up for you in front of the clan head. After all, this risks offending the immortal palace. 7th granduncle can't just casually make a decision." "All right, this junior understands." Xiaohua nodded. "Let's discuss the details of the Jade Eyes again. It might not be completely foolproof." "Good," Murong Junpeng said with a smile. "That's how it should be." Then, Murong Tsongyun placed the Jade Eyes on Ruyu's forehead and carefully read the details inside. Murong Junpeng also combined what he knew and slowly added. Unknowingly, 3 days passed by very quickly. Seeing that the details of this treasure hunt were correct, even if the Chu clan made any strange movements, they would be able to calmly deal with it. Xiaohua stood up and said, "At this point, we should still go and take a look. If it's inconvenient for the two of you, I'll go myself." "And this old man has the same idea," Murong Junpeng said with a smile. "Once we go out, the Chu clan will definitely have spies following us. They won't be able to find anything. It's better for this old man to go. I'll definitely report everything that fellow immortal Xiao has done to 7th granduncle." Murong Tsongyun looked at Xiaohua and said with a smile, "However, you have to be careful. I still want you to accompany me back to Murong Mountain Manor." The beautiful woman smiled beautifully. If true feelings entered the eyes, the beautiful woman was concerned. If true feelings entered the heart, Xiaohua's heart swayed. He said loudly, "Jin Xiao, don't worry. I'll definitely bring you back to Murong Mountain Manor safely. I believe in you." Murong Tsongyun faintly smiled and sent Xiaohua out of the hall. However, just as Xiaohua left, Murong Junpeng activated the origin formation in the hall and said faintly, "Yun'er, you shouldn't have pulled Xiaohua in. I feel that this Xiaohua is a bit strange. I'm afraid it will have some effect on your test this time." 14th granduncle, can you blame Yun'er? Murong Tsongyun sneered and said, "The clan only sent 2 uncles to protect Yun'er. Yun'er can't guarantee that he will be able to escape unscathed from such a powerful demonic god blood pool. Yun'er only saw a Taoist cultivator and felt that he was somewhat useful, so I wanted to borrow some external strength." In the end, 7th granduncle immediately sent 14th granduncle alone. Now, even if Xiaohua is a bit strange, what can this boy do? -13. Chapter 3884. This is the clan's test for you. Murong Junpeng smiled bitterly and said, "How could you go through so many twists and turns? Now, I've also been pulled in by you." Xiaohua didn't know that there were so many secrets of the Murong clan. He had already flown to the cliff and was waiting to inquire about the secrets of the Chu clan. He was still wondering if he could find out the true purpose of the Chu clan from Chu Yang's mouth. "Xiaohua, have you seen with your own eyes how your parents were wrongly accused and died under the family law?" Chu Yang asked Xiaohua the moment he saw him. Xiaohua was startled. He shook his head and said, "I'm a Tao cultivator, not a Confucian clan. I've never had such a cruel experience." But then Xiaohua comforted Chu Yang and said, "I sympathize with your experience, but it's all in the past. You still have to think about your parents' advice and live for yourself." "I haven't either." Chu Yang ignored Xiaohua and said again. Xiaohua was startled. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't know how to respond. But I've seen it. Chu Yang didn't need Xiaohua to answer. He continued, I have a younger cousin named Chu Nan. He's about the same age as me. When we were both 10 years old, his parents and mine were wronged at the same time. But in the end, his parents were executed by the clan's rules, while mine survived. Speaking until here, Chu Yang hesitated. Xiaohua didn't ask and just listened quietly. I was very happy at first, but also sad for Chu Nan. I often comforted him. Even my parents want to adopt Chu Nan and raise him as their own. But not long after, Chu Nan no longer paid attention to me, and also no longer paid attention to my parents. The matter of adoption was also put aside. At first, I was very surprised and always wanted to find him. After all, Chu Nan and I grew up together. But Chu Nan always avoided me. Even if he couldn't avoid me, he would still look at me coldly and treat me as an enemy. After a period of time, I finally heard some rumors and understood why Chu Nan hated me. Because, when my parents and his parents were wronged, his parents did not give in and spoke the truth. My parents bowed and bent their knees, and even pushed the blame to my parents who heard it. The result is obvious. Those who submit live, and those who are upright die. Actually, Xiaohua couldn't help but say, sometimes people have no choice but to give in, be it for yourself or for your child. However, Xiaohua also felt that his tone was very weak and couldn't prove anything. That's not the most important part. Chu Yang shook his head and said, the key point is that Chu Nan didn't live for long. During one of his training, he coincidentally died in an accident. This accident was too unexpected. Even I felt that it was a coincidence, but no one asked about it. I asked my parents about it, but all I got in return was a slap. So, from then on, I've been thinking about what people live for. For justice? For the sake of living? For the family? Or for myself? Chu Yang was almost muttering to himself, I don't understand. My parents can't answer me either. Many people in the clan even think of me as a lunatic. Before I entered the 5th grade of Origin Energy, I often went to the hidden immortal continent to gain experience. I've seen countless people's ugly faces, and I've also seen many righteous and kind people. However, I didn't see any meaning in them. Not to mention those evil people, they are purely selfish and deserve to die. Even among those kind people, how many of them are sanctimonious? How many of them are fishing for fame? From them, I only see selfish desires. Actually, not to mention them, even I feel that I'm ugly. I don't want to cultivate, but if I don't cultivate, I can't live in the clan. I have no choice but to cultivate. But in order to cultivate, I have no choice but to flatter others against my will and do things that I don't want to do. Is this the meaning of living? Actually, if I live like this, I might not be able to live until today. I'm afraid that I would have died long ago. The reason why I lived at first was to avenge Chu Nan, then was to avenge my parents. Chu Yang's eyes flashed with a sharp and ruthless light. In the end, my parents couldn't escape from that person's evil clutches. 20 years later, when no one in the clan was paying attention to that matter, that person finally made his move. Although that person did it very secretly, I clearly know that it was that person who did it. Since then, I have been very careful and never gave that person the slightest chance. And I also racked my brains to raise my cultivation, to find a chance of survival from that person's evil clutches. Xiaohua, tell me, what meaning can there be in living like this? By chance, I made a great contribution to the clan and received a reward to enter the treasure room to find a secret technique to cultivate. I obtained a secret technique called the Life and Death Talisman from the secret stone slab. Do you know what the Life and Death Talisman is? It was a situation where one could neither live nor die, and one could only seek a breakthrough between life and death. In order to cultivate, I was in a state of indifference between life and death every day, suffering and pain. It's just that while I was cultivating, that person was also improving. Although his improvement wasn't as fast as mine, his strength was originally stronger than mine. After so many years, even though I had already stepped into the 5th grade of Essence Energy, I still couldn't catch up to him. I originally thought that as long as I had the Life and Death Talisman technique, I would catch up to him sooner or later and behead him under my sword. But until 30 years ago, when the sword energy in my dantian started to show signs of going out of control, I suddenly realized that the life and death talisman wasn't a perfect technique. At the end of cultivation, the sword energy would eventually break free from my control, and my entire body would be engulfed by this sword energy. The so-called life and death talisman is a talisman that turns life into death. It's a secret technique that uses the body to refine talismans. Xiaohua, up until now, do you know the despair and disappointment in my heart? Even if it's God, he won't let me live a good life. He's so biased towards that evil person, so jealous of good people. In this world, is there still justice? Is there still fairness? Xiaohua was really speechless. All the comforting words in front of Chu Yang's bitter experience were pale and powerless, and turned into mere words. Perhaps this Xiao can help you perfect your technique? Xiaohua thought for a moment, and then suggested in a low voice. If it was 30 years ago, this Chu might have listened to these words. Chu Yang sighed and said, but 30 years later, these words are meaningless. Not to mention that this sword energy is getting harder and harder to control. This Chu's doubts are enough to crush this Chu. However, this Chu still wants to thank you. Xiaohua, you're the first person in this world to hear this Chu's inner thoughts. Now that this Chu has said these words, I don't have any trace of attachment. This Chu has countless regrets in this life, countless doubts, but at the last moment, I don't have any more regrets. This Chu is very gratified. Hee. Xiaohua rolled his eyes and said with a smile, can you tell this Xiao who your enemy is? Perhaps this Xiao can join hands with you to kill him? Haha, if these words came from Morongjong's mouth, this Chu would believe it. But if it came from you, how can this Chu believe it? Chu Yang laughed and said, but who is this person? You should have seen him before. He has a sanctimonious face. Other than me, who would know what kind of outrageous things he has done in the past? I've seen him before? Xiaohua was stunned and immediately realized. He asked curiously, could it be that you're talking about Chu Jinjin? Haha, right. Chu Jinjin is such an unyielding name. Why is it occupied by such a villain? Why can't this name make him do some righteous things? Chu Yang laughed, then stood up and looked around without any reluctance. He said again, this kind of person lives freely in this world. How can there be a way for us to live in this world? Forget it. After persisting for thousands of years in the end, I still have to walk this path. I only hope that the 6 paths of reincarnation that Buddhism talks about really exists. This Chu doesn't want to be a human after reincarnation. As he spoke, the sword light around Chu Yang's body uncontrollably rushed out, and his whole body rushed towards the distant devil god blood pool. Sigh, this is really inexplicable. Xiaohua looked at Chu Yang's flying figure. He was at a complete loss. He and Chu Yang were neither relatives nor friends. But Chu Yang had said so many strange things in front of him, and he wanted to commit suicide in front of him. This was one of the most inexplicable things that Xiaohua had ever encountered in his life. However, seeing Chu Yang rush into the restriction, Xiaohua couldn't help but raise his hand to grab and instantly imprison the space around Chu Yang. Although Chu Yang's cultivation was at the 5th level of essence energy, if he wanted to commit suicide in front of Xiaohua, it was still somewhat difficult. Buzz. Just when Xiaohua was about to confine the space, a rumbling sound suddenly came from Chu Yang's chest. A bowl-sized Buddha's light was emitted from the source of the sound. Layers upon layers of golden swan and eye turned into a heavenly dragon and flew out. A huge force was sucked in from the source of Xiaohua's magic power. A sudden change occurred, and before Xiaohua could understand, the suction force enveloped Xiaohua's whole body. The true essence in his meridians left his body uncontrollably and fell into Chu Yang's body. Not only that, even the space that Xiaohua had previously imprisoned was now fragmented, and turned into fragments that fell into the Buddha light. Oh, not good. At this time, how could Xiaohua not know that he had fallen into Chu Yang's trap? That golden in eye Hua's Buddha light was to make him activate his true essence? Xiaohua shouted, and lightning appeared around his body, and his figure retreated quickly. However, Although Xiao Hua's figure retreated quickly, the lightning was immediately pulled into the Buddha light as soon as it appeared. Moreover, the more Xiao Hua struggled, the stronger the suction force of the Buddha light became. Xiao Hua hurriedly felt as if his whole body was going to be sucked into the Buddha light. Strength of mountains. Xiao Hua was shocked, and he didn't dare to think too much about the disappearance of his true essence. He hurriedly formed a Buddha seal with his hands, and with a shout, he hit the Buddha light. -13. Chapter 3885. Boom. The Buddha's light flashed slightly, and the suction force weakened slightly. Xiao Hua seized this opportunity, and with the help of the fire escape technique, he suddenly disappeared from his original place. Just as Xiao Hua disappeared, that Buddha's light extended more than 100 feet in the direction of Xiao Hua's escape. Fortunately, Xiao Hua's escape technique was good, otherwise, he would still be dragged in by this Buddha's light. Damn it! Xiao Hua's figure flashed from several hundred feet away. Seeing that Buddha's light was like a big hand grabbing at nothing, it immediately withdrew after missing, and he couldn't help but curse. How can this Chu Yang be a Buddhist disciple? That Buddha's light fell back to Chu Yang's chest and immediately disappeared. As for Chu Yang's figure that had rushed into the restriction, it also froze in midair. And at this time, the left half of Chu Yang's body gave birth to a gloomy black sword light. This sword light began to rapidly rotate on the left side of the Buddha's light. In contrast, the right side of Chu Yang's body gave birth to a brilliant silver-white sword light. This sword light was rotating just like the left side, but the direction was completely different. Looking at the place where the Buddha's light disappeared again, a strange talisman was emitting a familiar Tao magical power fluctuation from top to bottom. Streams of blood-red liquid were slowly extracted from Chu Yang's body in this fluctuation and divided into two halves, falling into the left and right black and silver-white sword light. Hiss! Xiao Hua looked at this strange scene, and also sensed the gloomy and cold aura in the void. He couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. What happened in the end? Is Chu Yang going to commit suicide? Or does the Buddhist sect want to destroy the restriction? Or does the Tao sect cultivators want to provoke a war between immortals and Buddhas? Why is it that the more I look at it, the more I don't understand? In the few breaths of Xiao Hua's hesitation, two muffled sounds were heard. Chu Yang's body was split into two halves by the talisman. Half of his flesh fell into the dark sword light on the left, and the other half fell into the brilliant silver sword light on the right. Humans are humans. What is life? Ghosts are ghosts. What is death? Life as a human is difficult to understand. Death as a ghost is even more worrying. Chu Yang's voice was very faint. It sounded like the cry of a ghost. Why don't we turn it into a life and death talisman and wash away the shame of the Chu clan? Buzz buzz. As soon as Chu Yang's words fell, the two rotating sword beams emitted a huge roar. The Tao talisman in the middle also seeped into the sword beams. Looking from a distance, the two linked sword beams looked like a concentric knot. It also looked like a Tao talisman. It also looked like a pair of yin and yang eyes, observing all the ugliness in the world of the living and the underworld. Not good. Xiao Hua was shocked. Without thinking, he waved his hand. Dozens of crystal threads that looked like dragons appeared around the life and death talisman, trying to destroy it. However, as soon as the crystal threads appeared, the life and death talisman shot out two sword rays. They twisted in the air, and all the crystal threads were broken. The life and death talisman produced a suction force that swept away all the crystal threads, not allowing the crystal threads to release their power. The crystal thread entered the life and death talisman, causing it to expand by another 30%. Then, it shot toward the god-fiend blood pool at lightning speed. Damn it! Just as Xiao Hua was cursing, a dark light flashed around his body. Just as he raised the wishful staff, a similar curse came from a distance. Immediately, a sword beam that was several feet thick flew down like a waterfall. The sword energy was so oppressive that even Xiao Hua hurriedly dodged. Looking at the distance again, Chu Jianjing rushed over with a shocked and angry expression. Boom! Chu Jianjing's sword beam was so powerful that it seemed like everything within 100 feet would be annihilated. But strangely, When the sword beam fell into the life and death talisman, the life and death talisman let out a huge roar again. It involuntarily expanded by several times. The sword beam cut through the void, and the barrier shrouded by sword energy could not stop the life and death talisman from rushing into the god-fiend blood pool's restriction. Puff. A very soft sound, like a child blowing air, was heard. The life and death talisman fell on the transparent barrier. No? Chu Jianjing's eyes were wide open. He shouted and stretched out his right hand. 5 sword beams flew out from his fingers and grabbed the life and death talisman on the barrier. Unfortunately, just as the 5 sword beams flew out 10 feet, the blood light in the middle of the life and death talisman disappeared in an instant. The silver-white rotating sword beam merged with the dark sword beam. Boom! This time, the sound was very loud. A huge gray sword flew out from the life and death talisman and penetrated the god-fiend blood pool's barrier. Gotcha! Like a chicken's shell cracking, the crack instantly spread across the entire barrier. Countless waves of blood mixed with black flames flowed out like egg white. Xiaohua, you evil path, what are you doing? Chu Jianjing roared and looked at Xiaohua angrily. Xiaohua sneered. Can't you see what I'm doing? This is your Chu family's secret technique, the life and death talisman. This sword beam is also your Chu family's. What does it have to do with me? How do you know this is the life and death talisman? How do you know that this sword beam is Chu family's? Chu Jianjing shouted. Could it be that you are colluding with someone from Chu family? You want to destroy my Chu family's search for the God-Fiend chess? If you don't give me an explanation today, Xiaohua, what's going on? The commotion here had already alarmed everyone. Everyone flew out from the pavilion. Murong Songyun's anxious voice came from afar. Could it be that you? Seeing that the blood wave had already rushed out of the barrier, Chu Jianjing didn't hurry to reinforce the barrier or take the next step. Instead, he put the possible blame on himself. Xiaohua already understood that what Chu Jianjing said might not be false. A person's character was not easy to change. Chu Jianjing was this kind of person who only knew how to shirk responsibility. Xiaohua looked at the aggressive Chu Jianjing and said to Murong Songyun, who flew over, Miss Murong, this matter has nothing to do with me. This is Chu family's matter. We'll talk about the details after the situation stabilizes. The most important thing now is to protect this barrier. Chu Jianjing. Murong Junpeng was beside Murong Songyun. Hearing Xiaohua's words, he shouted loudly, Xiaohua is now a member of my Murong manor. My Murong family can take responsibility for his actions. Now that the barrier has changed, why aren't you hurrying to deal with it? Humph! With Murong manor's words, I'm relieved. Chu Jianjing snorted coldly and said, Your Murong manor must give my Chu family an explanation for this matter. Then, Chu Jianjing proudly looked at Xiaohua and coldly said, Although this evil Taoist has evil intentions, his cultivation is still very shallow. With his little tricks, how could he possibly break my Chu family's restriction formation? Just as Chu Jianjing said this, he heard the sound of 10,000 horses galloping in the gradually closing barrier. Moreover, indescribable groans and growls were unceasingly heard. Just as this sound fell into Xiaohua's ears, a kind of blood-red dusk, desolate color, and an indescribable feeling arose from the bottom of Xiaohua's heart. Battle of gods and devils? Xiaohua's complexion suddenly changed. He thought in surprise, could it be that there's really a god and devil chess in this god and devil blood pool? Not good. This was already the second time Chu Jianjing trembled. He couldn't help but look at Xiaohua and roar. What did you do? Xiaohua coldly looked at this sanctimonious thing and said, My cultivation is very shallow. What can I do? Besides, why did I come to the god and devil blood pool? Senior Chu's heart is as clear as a mirror. Why did I make myself uncomfortable for no reason? If Senior Chu wants to find the reason, it's better to settle the matter here first before talking about it. Murong Junpeng naturally sensed the might of the demonic god blood pool. Although most of the Chu family's barrier had been mended, within the glass-like barrier, the waves of blood that were originally like ocean waves were now even more devastating than a stormy sea. The berserk aura could no longer be concealed by the barrier, and a feeling of apocalypse arose in the hearts of all the spectators. Brother Chu. Morong Junpeng hurriedly shouted, there's no time to lose. Quickly act according to the plan in the jade eyes. But Uncle Zhongyu hasn't arrived yet. This timing, Chu Jianzheng was somewhat flustered and replied in a low voice. Adapt according to the situation. It's already at this juncture. How can you think so much? Murong Tsongyun couldn't help but shout. All the plans of the Chu family are clearly explained in the jade eyes. Now, it's just that the time has been brought forward. It's not a rushed response. Senior can send out a signal and quickly inform Senior Zhongyu. This responsibility? Chu Jianzheng slightly bit his lips. He still couldn't make a decision. Xiaohua smiled. He already firmly believed in Chu Yang's encounter. Perhaps Chu Yang was hiding something from him, but Chu Yang definitely didn't have the intention to deceive him. Or perhaps Chu Yang himself was deceived by others. Buddhist sect? Xiaohua suddenly thought of the Buddhist light in front of Chu Yang's chest. But before Xiaohua could speak, Murong Tsongyun glanced at Murong Junpeng and shouted, Senior, this junior can bear this responsibility. You don't need to worry. You can give the order now. Xiaohua was once again surprised by the strange scene in front of him. Murong Tsongyun was a junior. It was reasonable to say that he shouldn't say such words in front of Murong Junpeng. But Murong Junpeng didn't hear anything strange. Even Chu Jianzheng felt that it was normal. Xiaohua couldn't help but secretly ponder, damn it, in this, could it be that there's a secret that I don't know? All right. Chu Jianzheng looked at Murong Tsongyun's determined appearance and nodded. Since Miss Murong said so, this old man will listen to Miss Murong. Chu Jianzheng pushed his responsibility to Murong Tsongyun. But not only was Murong Tsongyun not displeased, he was even eager to give it a try. He urged, Senior, quickly give the order. If it's late, it will be troublesome. Seeing this, Chu Jianzheng didn't say anything else. He waved his hand and took out a small sword the size of a palm. Sword energy spurted out from his mouth. That small sword emitted a clear cry and flew into the distance. A strange sword cry was mixed with an indescribable fluctuation. Even when the sword light flew, a hazy figure was revealed in the entire barrier. -13. Chapter 3886. Senior Chu. When Murong Tsongyun saw the signal, the anxiety on his face lessened. He urged, Junior has already seen the plan in the Jade Eye. Junior will go with 14th uncle to the place we agreed on. Senior should also quickly arrange for the Chu family disciples to act according to the plan. AI. Since things have reached this point, we can only do this. Chu Jianzhen sighed and fiercely glared at Xiaohua. His figure turned into a sword and disappeared. Xiaohua. Murong Junpeng couldn't help but ask, what is going on? Xiaohua bitterly smiled. Junior has fallen into the Buddhist sex trap. However, I'm afraid there's no time to talk about it. Buddhist sect? Murong Junpeng was shocked. He turned to look at Murong Tsongyun. Both of their eyes flashed with shock. How do you know it's the Buddhist sect? Murong Tsongyun asked. However, before her voice fell, a strange whistling sound came from the top of the barrier. The dark restriction above Xiaohua and the others broke inch by inch. Tens of millions of wind particles were blown out from the demonic god blood and crazily rushed in all directions. Damn it! Murong Tsongyun clenched his teeth. 14th uncle, I'm afraid the demonic god blood has changed again. Let's act according to the Chu family's plan. I hope that acting in advance won't affect the future plans. Since things have reached this point, we can only do this. Murong Junpeng replied. He glanced at Xiaohua and said, Xiaohua, there's no need to say anything else. Let's act according to the plan we discussed before. Okay. Xiaohua nodded. His figure followed Murong Junpeng and Murong Tsongyun to the sky. At this moment, tens of thousands of cultivators had already appeared in the sky. They all activated their magic power and true qi. According to the Chu family's arrangement, they were scattered around the demonic god blood. At this moment, the god-fiend blood pool in front of everyone's eyes, which was originally a bloody mist, began to condense into blood stains. Roaring like a tsunami, ear-piercing sounds and chaotic fluctuations constantly rushed out in all directions. The originally clear sky was now covered with dark clouds. The dark clouds were constantly rolling and were also stained with traces of blood. This was caused by the god-fiend blood pool's bloody mist soaring into the sky. Not good. Looking at these filthy clouds, Xiao Hua was secretly alarmed. He hastily calculated. Although the amount of blood mist rushing into the clouds isn't much, and it doesn't mean much to many cultivators if it turns into rain, not only will it be harmful to ordinary people, it will also be harmful to the crops on the ground. We can't let these clouds spread to other places. Clang. Loud sword hums could be heard from all over the godly devil blood pool. A huge sword screen rushed out of the ground in the distance and descended towards the sky above the pool. Xiao Hua understood that this was one of the 9 sword diagrams of the Chu family. The Chu family divided the entire sword diagram into 9 pieces, which were controlled by the disciples of the Chu family. They were placed in 9 different locations in the blood god pool. Once the order was given, the 9 sword diagrams appeared at the same time and sealed off the blood mist that was rushing into the sky. Then, all the cultivators charged into the sword formation and suppressed the blood mist within the sword formation. However, according to the plan in the Jade Eyes, the sword diagram should be activated 2 days later, and the person in charge of it should be an expert of the 7th grade like Chu Zhongyu. Right now, because the life and death talisman had triggered the mutation in the blood god pool, the Chu family had no choice but to activate it in advance. Chu Zhongyu and the other experts of the 7th grade didn't appear, so the might of the sword diagram was obviously inferior. Sure enough, at this moment, Murong Juanping's complexion slightly changed. He looked at Murong Tsongyun and said, "Yuner, Chu Jinjin sent me a sound transmission and wants me to go over. His sword diagram still lacks some 6th grade cultivators to control it. My Murong manor requested the Chu family to activate it in advance, so I can't not go and control the sword diagram." "Yes, 14th uncle. You can go. Since Zhongyu and the other seniors aren't here, 14th uncle will be the mainstay." Murong Tsongyun nodded and replied. "Xiao Hua." Murong Junpeng opened his mouth and said, "In a while, when you enter the sword diagram, try your best to protect Yuner. Move quickly. I will wait for you inside the sword formation." "Yes, I understand." Xiao Hua nodded and extended his hand to take out the seal of overturning sea. Murong Junpeng had only left for a short while when he saw the sword diagram flickering. The resplendent sword light was like a huge boat riding the wind and breaking the waves as it penetrated deep into the blood waves. As the blood waves gradually obscured it, Xiao Hua and the others could also use their divine senses to inspect it. Xiao Hua's current strength had already stepped into the lower stages of the 6th grade, which was equivalent to the void refinement realm of the Dao sect in the Dawnrain continent. The range of his divine senses was around 1,000 to 3,000 miles. However, Xiao Hua's divine senses were far beyond those of the same level. Currently, his divine senses could reach 6,000 miles. In particular, Xiao Hua's Buddhist senses were more powerful than his divine senses. Currently, his divine senses could reach 8,000 miles. However, when Xiao Hua saw the Buddhist light appear in the life and death talisman, he could faintly feel the existence of Buddhist disciples. Therefore, he didn't dare to release his Buddhist senses and only used his divine senses to inspect it. Even so, Xiao Hua's divine senses were still able to see a very small portion of the sword diagram above the blood god pool. 1,000 miles away from Xiao Hua, Murong Junpeng and a few disciples of the Chu clan, as well as 2 other cultivators of the 6th grade, were standing on a sword diagram. Murong Juanping's cultivation couldn't be considered the highest, but because he was the representative of the Murong clan, he was surrounded by 8 other cultivators. Not only Murong Junpeng, but the other 8 cultivators also released their subbodies. Murong Juanpeng's subbody flashed with 3 colored clouds, while the 5 disciples of the Chu clan had their subbodies completely formed by sword light. Countless inscriptions flowed out from Murong Juanpeng's subbody, rolling up the clouds and rushing into the sword diagram below him. The inscriptions tumbled on the sword diagram, causing countless pillars of boundless qi and boundless crystal threads to appear. The entire sword diagram released a deafening rumbling sound. Looking at the 5 disciples of the Chu clan, their subbodies' feet were like the tip of a sword, inserted into the sword diagram. A huge amount of boundless chi poured into the subbodies from the void, and through the subbodies, they transformed into sword chi and entered the sword diagram. The momentum of the sword diagram below their feet was vast, even more intense than Morong Juanpeng's. Moreover, under the subbodies of the Chu clan disciples, there were hundreds of sword lights flowing all over the sword diagram. These sword lights collided with each other, fused together, and even intertwined with the inscriptions under Morong Juanpeng's and the other two cultivators' feet, forming crisscrossing sword scars. These sword scars were very deep, and the inscriptions inside were very dazzling. This sword diagram rapidly expanded under the control of the 9 6th grade essence energy cultivators, expanding towards the center of the divinity blood pool. The edges of the sword diagram were extremely sharp, and when it slashed through the blood mist in the air above the divinity blood pool, it emitted a strange, sizzling sound. Strands of blood were instantly annihilated by the abundant sword chi. Under the control of Morong Junpeng and the others, the sword diagram pierced into the blood mist without any suspense. Even the blood mist that was separated by the sword diagram was turned into nothingness by the 9 cultivators' divine abilities. For 6th grade cultivators, dealing with the blood mist that had lost its source was as easy as lifting a finger. The formation of the sword diagram seemed to be going very smoothly. Aside from Morong Juanpeng's group of 9 cultivators, there were 8 other sword diagrams that flew towards the center of the demonic god blood pond. Each sword diagram rapidly expanded and gradually covered the entire sky above the demonic god blood pond. Of course, following the expansion of the sword diagrams, the area controlled by the 9 cultivators also rapidly expanded. Even the crisscrossing sword scars under their feet were now extremely long, and the number of grids between the sword scars also increased. Although they were all 6th grade cultivators, when the sword diagrams gradually closed in the center of the demonic god blood pond, these 81 6th grade cultivators wouldn't be able to completely control the entire 10,000 li radius demonic god blood pond. Another 9 bursts of sword chi flew out of the blood god's sword diagram and charged towards various parts of the blood god's pool. When Morong Tsongyun, who was beside Xiaohua, saw this, he hastily took out a small sword from his chinkuan pouch and opened his mouth. True chi fell on the small sword, and the small sword began to expand and soared into the sky. Looking at the surrounding cultivators, who were also waiting in formation like Xiaohua, they all took out similar small swords. Clang clang. At this moment, the sky above the demonic god blood pond was filled with the cries of 10,000 swords. Countless sword rays flew out from the sword diagrams, extremely magnificent and extremely vast. When these sword rays scattered in all directions, they covered the small swords that flew out. Whoosh! In an instant, the small swords formed a net of sword rays that swept down from top to bottom, covering Xiaohua, Morong Tsongyun, and the cultivators waiting at the edge. Wong wong wong. At the same time, the entire sword diagram rapidly shook. Xiaohua and the others moved along the sword rays and entered the sword diagram. Under the effect of the sword diagram, the distance of 1,000 kilometers was covered in an instant. When the sword rays around Xiaohua and the others disappeared, they were standing in a small grid separated by several sword scars. Xiaohua scanned the area with his divine sense and saw that he and Morong Tsongyun were standing in a grid. There were also cultivators standing in 2 or 3 adjacent grids. Xiaohua couldn't help but frown as he thought to himself, "This looks like a chessboard for playing chess. Then aren't we all the chess pieces on the board? Then wouldn't the so-called demonic god chess piece also fall on this sword diagram? Such a huge demonic god blood pond actually needs to be covered by this sword diagram. Just the Chu family is truly beyond their power. Could it be that the Morong family also has a part in this?" Just as Xiaohua was thinking, a voice that sounded like the cry of a sword resounded from within the sword guard. "Fellow immortals, please activate the sword diagram below according to the chants recorded in the Jade Eyes. Wait until we completely cover the Fiend God blood pool before we decide on the next step." Morong Tsongyun glanced at Xiaohua and said, "Xiaohua, if you're ready, let's begin." "Okay." Xiaohua nodded. His entire body flashed with sword radiance. Waves of righteous chi flew out from the void and landed on the sword radiance. The huge sword instantly became several dozen meters long. Although it was a lot smaller than the swords of the Chu family disciples, it was enough to catch Murong Tsongyun's attention. -13. Chapter 3887. This Xiaohua is truly amazing. He actually managed to cultivate the sword chi of a Confucian cultivator to such a level. If given enough time, he will definitely be able to shake the world. Only, it's truly a pity. As Murong Tsongyun thought this, he clapped his hands and tricolored true chi rushed out of his head. An inscription flashing on his body also flew out. As the saying goes, many hands pick up firewood, the flames grow. Previously, the 81 6th grade essence energy cultivators controlling the sword diagram was indeed powerful, but the sword diagram was already somewhat shaky in the blood god pool. When Xiaohua and the others fell into the sword diagram, although their cultivations were far inferior to Murong Juanpeng's, there were too many people. The sword diagram, which was originally a bit bumpy, instantly stabilized and rushed towards the center of the blood god pool even faster. Seeing that the sword diagram was about to close, the blood mist above the blood god pool was squeezed into a struggling blood dragon. A huge force suddenly entered the sword diagram from where the 9 sword diagrams closed. With a kachach sound, the edges of the 9 sword diagrams immediately cracked. Over 100 weaker cultivators were unexpectedly thrown into the air by this impact. However, this detail was not unexpected. Everyone had already discussed this when they received the Jade Eyes. The 81 cultivators roared in unison and 81 pillars of chi appeared with a loud bang. Xiaohua and the others also activated their true chi at the same time. With a honk sound, the blood dragon's neck was suddenly grabbed by the sword diagram and cut in half. The blood mist in the air disappeared with the wind. The blood mist under the sword diagram unyieldingly attacked the sword diagram along with the other blood waves. Unfortunately, the sword diagram was now tightly closed. The sharp sword light flickered and pierced out. The blood mist rushed into the sword light and immediately turned into nothingness. Good. Everyone couldn't help but shout when they saw this. They knew that the first step had been completed without any danger. I'm afraid it's not that simple. Although Xiaohua was happy, he hid inside the sword light and looked at the sword light flickering above the sword diagram. He thought to himself, right now, we've only sealed the blood mist of the blood god pool. Next, we'll have to suppress this blood mist. He had no idea what the blood mist was, but it looked similar to the aura of the netherworld. If he could collect it, it wouldn't be too difficult. After all, it was better to release it than to block it. For the Chu clan to forcefully suppress it might be a little dangerous. Of course, if it wasn't for the danger, this so-called celestial devil chess would have been found by others long ago. How could it be the Chu clan's turn? The blood mist of the demonic god blood pool was forcibly suppressed by the Chu family's sword diagram. The power that soared to the sky was brewing under the sword diagram. After a short while, Xiaohua felt the sword diagram under his feet start to tremble, and the intersecting sword scars on the sword diagram also started to shine with different colors. Sword diagram, blood pool. I will slay gods and demons with my sword. A loud and clear voice filled with vicissitudes of life came from the other side of the sword diagram. Then, the sword light of the sword mark shone brightly, and a powerful suction force was generated from the sword guard. Xiaohua glanced at Murong Tsongyun and didn't dare to be negligent. At this time, there were several tens of thousands of cultivators fighting against the entire demonic god blood pool. Xiaohua's individual strength was very weak. Murong Tsongyun was as serious as Xiaohua. His true chi entered the sword diagram along with his body. The sword scars around Xiaohua and Murong Tsongyun emitted a dazzling sword light, and a several zhang thick sword pillar came out from the bottom of the sword diagram. It quickly pierced into the blood mist. The sword pillar's brilliance seemed to be solid, and everywhere it went, the blood mist turned into ashes. Moreover, there were still some thin threads of light and clouds between the sword pillars, and they were connected to each other. Although the sword light of each sword pillar was different in strength, under the balance of these sword threads, all of the sword pillars fell down at the same time. Following the fall of the sword pillars, a large amount of blood mist was destroyed by the sword pillars. Xiao Hua looked at the sword pillars, looked at the situation of the entire sword diagram, and secretly muttered in his heart, the Chu clan is really a fourth-rate aristocratic family, really extravagant. This sword diagram must have been passed down by the ancestors of the Chu clan. It's impossible to refine such a large origin formation without a literature sage or literature star realm, right? But the problem is that this sword diagram is suitable to be used to destroy the great formation protecting the mountain, but to use it on this demonic god blood pool, I feel that something is wrong. Let's not talk about a group of 6th-level origin energy cultivators working together to disperse the blood mist. Just by starting from a corner of the demonic god blood pool, I'm afraid that they can tear a hole in the blood pool. It's better than covering the entire blood pool, right? I really don't know what the Chu clan is planning to do. Boom! Just as Xiao Hua was pondering, the entire demonic god blood pool shook. All of the sword pillars pierced into the blood pool at almost the same time, and the huge impact lifted the sword diagram up again. And at the same time the sword diagram flashed, the nearby Murong Tsongyun's face flashed with a trace of redness, and he almost groaned in a low voice. Oh? Xiao Hua hastily focused his attention and immediately sensed the strangeness of the sword diagram. As the sword diagram trembled, a strange aura rushed into the sword pillars. This aura was not some restriction, nor was it any magic power, nor was it the aura of the underworld. However, Xiao Hua was somewhat familiar with this aura. It was similar to the ghost technique used by the underworld's magistrate that day, and was specially used to attack the mysterious dark clouds. Although this aura was extremely weak, it was still very hard for Murong Tsongyun, who had never cultivated any soul techniques, to resist. As for Xiao Hua, because his soul cultivation had already entered the sorcerer realm, he did not have any special soul techniques to defend himself, and this strange aura could not cause any harm to him. That's not right. Xiao Hua was somewhat astonished. Righteous Qi had always been the nemesis of the demon realm and the underworld. Especially that Confucian cultivator's innate life energy, it was an existence that could wipe out death energy. How could Murong Tsongyun, who was at 5th-level origin energy, be afraid of this weak aura? Xiao Hua's eyes slightly turned, and his entire body began to tremble. He asked in a low voice, Lady Murong, why is this aura so strange? This Xiao feels that it is similar to the water of the yellow springs. But this Xiao has the righteous qi of Confucian cultivators. Why would I be afraid of this aura? Murong Tsongyun's lips were somewhat green, and the true energy in his body was rapidly revolving. He opened his mouth and said, Fellow immortal Xiao might not know, but the blood fog and blood stains in this demonic god blood swamp are not completely netherworld qi. At the same time, there is also some demonic qi, and some other things that we Confucian cultivators do not know. Of course, we do not need to be afraid of pure netherworld qi and demonic qi, but with that strange thing mixed in, even a literary sage with 8th-level origin energy would not dare to act blindly without thinking. So that's how it is. Xiao Hua nodded his head. No wonder no one in the hidden immortal continent dared to look for the demonic god chess in this demonic god blood swamp. Xiao Hua's words naturally had a double meaning, but Murong Tsongyun did not point it out. Instead, he looked at Xiao Hua's sword and asked curiously, Fellow immortal Xiao, your flying sword technique seems to be somewhat similar to legalism, but it is also somewhat different. This concubine really did not expect that a Taoist cultivator who could not even compare to Duanmu Qing back then would actually advance to this level. Hee. Xiao Hua faintly smiled and said, Lady, are you not the same? Back then, this Xiao did not expect that you would actually be a master of 5th-level origin energy. This concubine was transforming back then. Not to mention 4th-level origin energy, I was not even at 3rd-level origin energy. Of course you would not be able to see it. Murong Tsongyun smiled and asked, Do you think that this concubine is inferior to that princess by Hua? Xiao Hua was speechless. He looked at the smiling Murong Tsongyun and shook his head. This Xiao has never drunk any daughter's tea. Daughter's tea? Ha ha ha. Murong Tsongyun laughed loudly, as if he understood the meaning behind Xiao Hua's words. However, At this moment, a huge wave of aura blew over like ice. The entire sword pillar's sword aura actually gave birth to a light purple color. Murong Songyun's body suddenly trembled, as if his body was about to collapse. Woo! Murong Songyun didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly took out a fist-sized flower from his bosom. He opened his mouth, and a mouthful of true energy entered the flower. The flower grew with the wind, and in a moment, it turned into a several dozen feet long lily, covering him and Xiaohua. Thin stamens flew out of the lily like soul threads, wrapping around Xiaohua and Murong Songyun. That ice-like aura was immediately cut off by a large portion. Xiaohua hurriedly shouted. Inserting the sword pillar into the pool of blood was something that was discussed with the jade eyes. However, this cold aura is truly powerful. I wonder how the Chu family will deal with it? Unless they have an extremely strong yang weapon. Murong Songyun also frowned. Otherwise, I also don't know how to deal with it. Kong Kong. While Murong Songyun was speaking, the sound of an army came from above the sword diagram. Shortly after, a colorful cloud rolled over from the horizon. On the cloud, there were dozens of women wearing colorful clothes. They were either holding a pipa or a harp. The sound of an army came from their instruments. Looking behind these women, there were 8 well-rounded, beautiful women riding on a wave of flowers flying over. Each of the women had a fresh flower on their head, and each of the women wore a colorful feather dress. Each of the women had a sweet smile on their face, and their eyes were filled with holiness. What are they doing? Xiaohua's divine sense swept over, and he immediately sensed that these women were only between the 3rd and 4th grade of essence energy. Compared to the majority of the cultivators on the sword diagram, they were inferior. He didn't understand what kind of help these women had. Murong Songyun also seemed to be a bit confused. While he urged the white flower to block the cold aura, his beautiful eyes flashed with doubt as he looked at the sky. The 8 women stepped on the rain of flowers and landed on the sword diagram in the midst of the music. When the music came to an abrupt end, the 8 women slapped their own heads with the back of their hands. Immediately after that, dual-colored true qi gushed out, and 8 shiny objects of different colors flew out from their heads. Xiaohua's divine sense scanned the things that flew out, and he was stunned. He could not help but stare, and even his pupils could not help but slightly dilate, because these 8 shiny things were none other than 8 naked female sculptures. -13. Chapter 3888. This woman's sculpture was made of crystal, and there was a hint of pink in the sparkling light. It was even more alluring than the skin of an ordinary woman. What was special was that the size of the sculpture was similar to that of an ordinary person, and the various details on the surface of the sculpture were particularly vivid. Although the true qi of the 8 women could cover up some of the details, it was still enough to make one's blood boil upon seeing it. This. Murong Songyun blushed shyly at first, but then he seemed to have thought of something and exclaimed, "This is the 8 hidden immortal beauties?" Xiaohua naturally realized that he was acting inappropriately. He hurriedly retracted his gaze and turned to look at Murong Songyun. However, he didn't know why, but in his eyes, Murong Songyun was actually the same as the 8 beautiful crystal statues, as if he wasn't wearing any clothes. Xiaohua hurriedly closed his eyes and shook his head. Only then did he ask in a low voice, "I'm ignorant and inexperienced. Miss, please teach me. What are the hidden immortal 8 beauties?" "Humph." Murong Songyun sneered and asked disdainfully, "Since fellow immortal Xiao cultivates my Confucian cultivation technique, you must have read my Confucian scriptures. Do you know the 8 hidden immortal beauties?" Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After thinking for a moment, he shook his head and said, "I really don't know. I'll have to ask Miss for advice." "Yes." Murong Songyun nodded and replied, "You really aren't a disciple of legalism." When Murong Songyun disintegrated, the 8 crystal statues continued to expand. However, at this time, the clouds had already become clothes that covered the crystal statues' curves. Legend has it that in the ancient times, there were 8 peerless beauties in the hidden immortal continent. Each of them can be described with 4 sentences. Murong Songyun explained, a beauty that outshines the moon and puts flowers to shame. A beauty that captivates the birds and beasts. A body that can cause the downfall of a country and its people. A figure that can captivate the soul. Oh, these 4 sentences describe 8 beauties? Xiao Hua once again cast his gaze towards the 8 crystal beauties. Yes, a beauty that outshines the moon and shames the flowers. A beauty that captivates the birds and beasts. It is used to describe the beauty of Shi Shi, Diaochan, Zhaojun, and Yuhuan. Look at the 4 on the left. Not only are they extremely beautiful, the clothes they are wearing also have faint patterns of the moon, flowers, fish, and geese. These are the 4 beauties. As Murong Songyun spoke, he pointed with his finger. Look at the 4 on the right. They are Daji, Baosi, Consort Xiang, and Fian. Their bodies are so beautiful that even the fairies can't compare to them. That's why they are praised for their beauty. The beauty of these 4 beauties can no longer be seen clearly. Presumably, fellow immortal Xiao has already seen them once, right? Hee. Xiao Hua didn't answer, but instead asked, these 8 beauties are indeed world-shaking beauties. But what's the use of their crystal statues at this time? You looked very surprised just now. Alas, this is an ancient secret of my scholarly family. Murong Songyun sighed and said, although these 8 beauties are unrivaled in beauty, they still can't escape the calamity of a beautiful woman's life. None of them have a good ending. However, their fates gave some male cultivators a lot of insights. It was said that many literary sages and literary stars' poems were written by these 8 beauties. Furthermore, it was rumored that when 8 literary stars ascended, they used love as a knife and love as a chisel to carve out 8 beautiful crystal sculptures. Each sculpture contained the insights of a literary star, and each sculpture revealed the beauty of a beautiful woman. Furthermore, when each sculpture is completed, all sorts of astronomical phenomena will be born. The so-called beauty that outshines the moon and flowers, captivates the birds and beasts, brings disaster to the country and people, and is infatuated by the astronomical phenomena. Imperial equipment? Spirit weapon? A soul armament? When Xiao Hua heard this, he was even more surprised. He didn't know what this 8 beauty sculpture was. Then what is the use of these 8 beauty sculpture? Xiao Hua asked. Murong Songyun looked at the women under the crystal sculptures and faintly said, just watch, they're about to cast the spell. As if to prove Murong Songyun's words, the 8 women opened their mouths at the same time. At this moment, what they spat out wasn't true qi, but essence blood. When the essence blood fell into the crystal sculptures, a layer of scarlet appeared on the sculptures, and then a layer of blood light flowed out from the crystal sculptures. Wang. The 8 crystal beauties began to tremble slightly. Then 8 faint rays of light shot out from the crystal beauties' heads and landed on the 8 women's bodies. Shua. The flesh of the 5 women instantly withered. The beautiful old woman who had turned into a bag of bones didn't even have any flesh left. Only white bones remained. When the light disappeared, these bones turned into ashes and disappeared in the wind. Xiao Hua was a bit shocked. Then, he looked at the 8 crystal beauties' skin and flesh gradually grew back. Each of their peerless appearances began to appear. The one closest to Xiao Hua had creamy skin and picturesque eyebrows. Her eyelashes that hadn't opened yet slightly trembled, causing Xiao Hua's heart to tremble along with her eyelashes. The one slightly further away had a face that was like a full moon. She seemed to be slightly inferior to the previous woman, but when Xiao Hua's gaze landed on the curves, he couldn't help but feel an inexplicable heat in his stomach. On the side, Murong Songyun faintly said, this 8 beauties sculpture requires 8 girls with similar aptitudes to control it. These girls have to use their own essence blood to nourish the sculpture. When their true qi is formed, they have to send the sculpture into their bodies to cultivate it. When it's time to use it, they have to use their life essence to activate the will left behind by Wenxing. After the 8 beauty sculpture is used, although it only lasts for a few moments, its strength can reach the level of a 1 saint. If the 8 beauty sculpture is used in battle, it will definitely be a great killing weapon. If it's used here, I don't think it will have much of an effect. AI. For this demonic god chess, the Chu family has prepared a lot. Xiao Hua sighed. This sword diagram, which one of the 8 beauties sculpture, doesn't need to spend a lot of time and manpower. Only with effort will there be rewards. Murong Songyun faintly smiled and said, if the Chu family wants to enter the top 3 aristocratic families, they must pay a price. What about the Murong family? Xiao Hua asked with interest. Murong Songyun calmly replied, they can only surpass it. It's just that you're not a member of an aristocratic family, so you don't know. At this time, the 8 crystal beauties had already been reconstructed. Each of them was as beautiful as fairies, and each of them danced with countless temptations. Of course, their auras that soared into the sky caused the red clouds in the sky to stir. As the 8 living crystal beauties soared into the sky, their figures suddenly crossed 1,000 li. These 8 crystal beauties stood separately on the sword diagram. A beautiful song came out of their mouths. As the song spread out, 8 terrifying pillars of vast chi, mixed with a huge amount of crystal threads, fell from the sky, rushing into the crystal beauty's head. The crystal beauty's body was covered in a rainbow-colored radiance. The rainbow light quickly descended along with the dance of the beauties and pounced on the sword diagram. This is music. Seeing this, Xiao Hua couldn't help but be shocked. How can music alone have such power? Boom, boom, boom. As if answering Xiao Hua's question, the entire world trembled. The sword diagram that was previously washed away by the terrifying aura was now rapidly descending. The countless sword pillars that were stopped by the blood waves suddenly expanded and crazily pierced into the blood pool. The sword diagram that couldn't be activated by tens of thousands of cultivators was now firmly controlled by the 8 crystal beauties with the strength of literary saints. When the sword diagram was completely repaired, the god-fiend blood pool could no longer be heard. Rays of light flashed in everyone's eyes, and the 8 crystal beauties once again turned into sparkling and translucent crystals before falling from the sky. Although the crystal beauties were still naked, Xiao Hua's eyes were filled with shock, and he didn't dare to have a trace of blasphemy, because the power of these 8 beauties was really too strong. When the 8 crystal sculptures fell, the group of women who came by stepping on the clouds hurriedly caught them, respectfully covered them with a rainbow brocade, and hurriedly left. Seeing these women fly away, the exhausted Chu Jianjin appeared in the sky. He waved his hand and said, disciples, rest for a moment, then we will work together to break the seal. Although Chu Jianjin spoke while standing in the sky, his voice came from the sword marks in the sword diagram. It sounded sonorous and powerful. Xiao Hua stood inside the sword guard and looked at the cultivators who heaved a sigh of relief. His heart skipped a beat, because Murong Songyun, who had been attacked by the cold aura earlier, did not seem to have relaxed. Moreover, Xiao Hua could faintly see that there was still Zhen Qi flowing between Murong Songyun's feet. I'm afraid it's not that simple. Just as Xiao Hua thought of this roar, a strange sound came from the sword diagram, and soon after, Xiao Hua felt an inexplicably familiar fluctuation. Xiao Hua hurriedly released his divine sense and saw that fist-sized bubbles appeared in the blood under the sword diagram. All the sword pillars around the bubbles shattered upon contact, even worse than ordinary withered wheat straw. This fluctuation? Xiao Hua suddenly realized something. It's like what I encountered when I was pregnant in the void, but it's a bit different. Xiao Hua hurriedly looked at Murong Songyun. Murong Songyun's face was a bit pale, and his eyes were flickering. Miss Murong, Xiao Hua asked straightforwardly, although you and I aren't close friends, now that we meet again after parting at Zhai Xinglu, we are old acquaintances. I originally didn't want to get involved in the trouble of the blood, but Miss appeared and forced me to stay. This Xiao promised Senior Murong to protect Miss's safety, but now that things have come to this, is Miss still hiding something? What is there to hide? Murong Songyun bit his lips and said in a low voice, the blood is a famous forbidden area in the hidden immortal continent, and the Chu family is only a 4th-rate family. If they want to covet the celestial devil chess, they naturally have some methods. Moreover, there are many unknown abnormalities in the blood. -13. Chapter 3889. While Murong Songyun was talking, Chu Jinjin flew out of the sword diagram and shouted, "Disciples, don't worry. This is the reaction of the celestial demon chess. Our Chu family has encountered this in the past. The reason why we didn't do anything is because this anomaly is really troublesome. Ordinary imperial tools can't restrain it. 10 years ago, our Chu family got a treasure by chance that can restrain this anomaly. Disciples, please wait a moment." Then, Chu Jinjin took out a small Chinquan bag and shouted, "Disciples, where are you?" Following Chu Jinjin's order, another several hundred Chu family disciples flew into the sky with the help of the sword radiance. However, these several hundred Chu family disciples didn't have any sword radiance around them, and they didn't stand on auspicious clouds either. Buddha, these Chu family disciples have Buddha cultivation? Xiao Hua was stunned. At the same time, he felt that something was wrong. Sure enough, Chu Jinjin took out an item from his Chinquan bag and showed it to Xiao Hua. It was a Skunda demon subduing diagram. However, this diagram was different from ordinary ones. It was a formation diagram with hundreds of Skunda. Each Skunda looked different and held different Buddhist tools. Some were demon subduing pestles, some were monk staffs, and some were alms bowls. Hundreds of Chu family disciples activated their telekinesis, and the formation diagram flashed with Buddhist light. It was like a huge Buddhist cloud that quickly spread in all directions. Murong Tsongyun. Seeing the Buddhist tool on the celestial demon blood pool, Xiao Hua was angry and said coldly, "Since we're here, why is there a Buddhist tool? Could it be that the Buddhist light I saw before was fake? Miss, if you don't tell me the truth, I'll leave right now." Then, Xiao Hua recalled his avatar and was about to leave the sword diagram. However, just as he moved, a huge suction force grabbed him and he couldn't move at all. Although Murong Tsongyun was a bit panicked, his eyes were full of ridicule. He said, "Xiao Hua, since we're here, why bother? You and I are both chess pieces on the chessboard. Why don't we wait until the game is over? If you don't have strength, then you're just a chess piece that can be manipulated by others." Xiao Hua smiled coldly. "If you have strength, then a chess piece can also overturn the chessboard." As he spoke, there was a flash of dark light around Xiao Hua, and the sword guard Murong Tsongyun was in began to tremble. The seemingly unbreakable sword pattern was covered in a layer of sword energy. Clusters of blood light and inscriptions condensed and rushed out from the sword energy. "Xiao Hua." Murong Tsongyun was shocked and quickly. He shouted, "Stop. If you leave, a flaw will appear in the sword diagram. Not only will the decades of planning by us Confucian cultivators be for naught, even the tens of thousands of cultivators on the sword diagram will die because of you. As long as you stop, I'll tell you the truth." Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes. He looked at Murong Tsongyun's panicked expression and then looked at the broken sword diagram under his feet. He knew that what Murong Tsongyun said was true. He was already a chess piece on the chessboard. If he wanted to escape, he had to destroy a corner of the sword diagram. Once that corner was formed, the entire chessboard would be swallowed by the blood of the gods and devils. Since there was a Buddhist light and a Buddhist weapon, if he destroyed it, wouldn't the hidden immortal continent's Confucian cultivators hate him to the bone? At that time, he could only escape to the Western Paradise and the Thousand Devil Sacred Realm. Fine. Xiao Hua stopped his power, and the sword diagram quickly closed. Xiao Hua stared at Murong Tsongyun and said, "I'll believe you this time. Speak. You. What is your strength? Is it the upper tier of the 5th grade?" Murong Tsongyun looked at the sword guard under Xiao Hua's feet and said in shock, "When I saw you, you weren't even 4th grade yet. Since Lady Murong has the Murong family's secret technique, why can't I have the Dao sect's butterfly transformation technique?" Xiao Hua said indifferently, "Lady should quickly answer my question." "Fine." Murong Tsongyun bitterly smiled and looked around. He transmitted his voice. Actually, the Chu family's search for the god and devil chess in the blood of the gods and devils was just a cover. Oh, it wasn't completely a cover. The Chu family did have some movements in the hidden immortal continent. They did want to find something, but they didn't find anything for several hundred years. But 10 years ago, when they set their sights on the blood of the gods and devils, this operation became a trap. A trap to kill the Buddhist sect in the hidden immortal continent. No wonder. Xiao Hua suddenly realized. I knew it. How could a god and devil chess be worth a fourth-grade Confucian family's effort? And such a huge sacrifice? How much do you know about the god and devil chess? Murong Tsongyun frowned and asked curiously. Isn't it just one of the 10 great imperial artifacts? It's even ranked 5th. Xiao Hua disagreed, but he immediately felt something was wrong. His eyes focused and asked, could it be that the rumors are wrong? That's right. Murong Tsongyun nodded. This god and devil chess is far from the 10 great imperial artifacts that you think. Xiao Hua quickly waved his hand to stop Murong Tsongyun's explanation. He urged, Lady, tell me about this trap first. AI, 10 years ago, when the conflict between the immortals and Buddhas was getting more and more intense, the Confucian families in the hidden immortal continent already had plans to kill the Buddhist sect's disciples. But the Buddhist sect's bald donkeys were truly sinister. They only left an old monk without any Buddhist cultivation as the abbot. This made us unable to find an excuse. And after seeing the old monk killed, the elders knew that this matter wouldn't end well, so they discussed and found an excuse. Many cultivators in the hidden immortal continent knew that the Chu family was looking for something. So the families found the Chu family and asked for their help. Of course, the Chu family wouldn't agree so easily. After some discussion, the families agreed to some conditions of the Chu family and began to set up the trap for the god and devil blood pool. As for the specific conditions, I don't know. I only found out about the truth a few months ago. It seems that after this battle, the Chu family will be promoted to a third-rate family. Of course, accompanying 7th granduncle to the god and devil blood pool is not a coincidence. I came here as a bait to let the Buddhist sect's disciples dispel their suspicions. Murong Tsongyun was somewhat distressed. The Chu family is a fourth-rate family. If a second or third-rate family interfered, the Chu family definitely wouldn't come here to look for treasure. Therefore, it's not easy for experts above the fourth-rate family to appear. But if there aren't any high-level families appearing, it's too fake. Because it's impossible for the high-level families to not know about this. There must be someone who can suppress the high-level families, and this person must represent a force. It's impossible for it to be one of the 4 great families. All the families' gazes fell on the first-rate families. I don't know what kind of compromise they will make, but it fell on my Murong family. As for me, at this point, Murong Tsongyun slightly lowered his head and faintly said, and my background is somewhat inappropriate. In order to cover up my background, I had no choice but to agree to this condition. Of course, Xiao Hua, you also saw it. This time, it's very dangerous. The slightest bit of carelessness will result in death. Therefore, I asked 7th granduncle to send 2 granduncles to protect me. Serves me right. When I saw you that day, I thought of how powerful you were and wanted to pull you over. In the end, you also saw it. 7th granduncle actually tested your strength. In order to not arouse the Buddhist sect's suspicions, 7th granduncle only sent 14th granduncle. Of course, 7th granduncle's promise to you must be true. Because if you protect me and kill the Buddhist sect's disciples, the various large families should understand your role. They are very powerful. The Immortal Palace's militarists don't dare to provoke them too much. Your matter shouldn't count for much. Oh, so it's like that. Xiao Hua suddenly understood. Then, he looked at the Buddhist clouds that filled the sky falling down. On the Buddhist clouds, Skundas appeared one by one. He asked, then what's the specific arrangement? The specific arrangement is very simple. Murong Tsongyun looked at the Buddhist clouds and was alarmed. He replied, first, the Chu family enticed the Buddhist sect's disciples to notice the god-demon blood pool's treasure hunt. Then, they provoked them to have the idea of killing the Confucian cultivators. After all, there are tens of thousands of Confucian cultivators in the god-demon blood pool. Many of them are 4th or 5th grade essence energy. If there is a war between immortals and Buddhas, they will be the main force. If the Buddhist sect makes the first move, they will definitely gain a big advantage in the future. How did they provoke them? Xiao Hua was somewhat surprised. I don't know the specific situation. Murong Tsongyun said with a smile. It seems like the Chu family spread the news that they were looking for an imperial weapon that could suppress the god-demon blood pool. Later, They actually found this Skunda demon subduing diagram. Anyone who saw it would know that the Buddhist sect's disciples had taken the bait. I understand now. Xiaohua nodded. The Buddhist sect's disciples must have done something to this Skunda demon subduing diagram. They could take advantage of the time when the Chu family was activating the diagram to kill tens of thousands of Confucian cultivators. Then, the Confucian aristocratic family would take advantage of the situation and attack after the diagram. Correct. Morong Songyun bit his lips and said in a low voice, the plan was like this. The Jade Eyes also arranged everything well. But unfortunately, an accident happened. The time was brought forward. Xiaohua nodded. The Buddhist sect's disciples are not vegetarians. Damn it. No, they are vegetarians. They are not stupid. When they saw that something was wrong, they wanted to leave. But they were not willing to give up the Skunda demon subduing diagram or the lives of these tens of thousands of Confucian cultivators. So, they found Chu Yang. This Chu Yang has nothing to do with the whole plan. Maybe he was really disappointed in life and survival. But his death was used by the Buddhist sect. Only, how did the Chu family have that kind of strange life and death talisman cultivation method? This is unthinkable. -13. Chapter 3890. Who is Chu Yang? Morong Songyun was dumbfounded when he heard Xiaohua's voice that sounded like he was talking to himself. Chu Yang is a disciple of the Chu clan that I met before the restriction of the blood of gods and demons. Xiaohua looked at the incomplete Skunda demon subduing formation diagram and explained. His life experience was somewhat miserable, and he cultivated a certain death life and death talisman. What's more, this life and death talisman actually required a Taoist spell to activate. Perhaps he was bewitched by a Buddhist disciple and wanted to find a Taoist disciple, but he didn't expect that he would find this Xiao. When that person committed suicide, this Xiao just happened to be there. The Buddhist disciple used Chu Yang to force the Chu clan to act 3 days earlier, and the experts of the Chu clan and the other clans weren't here. The Buddhist disciple caught us off guard. That's right. Although this concubine has just stepped into the 5th level of origin energy, in this god-fiend blood pool, under the Buddhist sect's planning, I might really lose my life. Morong Songyun said with a bitter smile. Sigh, 5th grade. Miss Morong, how old are you? Xiaohua looked at Morong Songyun and asked. You. Why are you asking this? Morong Songyun didn't understand. Xiaohua shook his head slightly. Looking at the Buddhist sect's formation diagram descending, he smiled bitterly and said, previously, this Xiao felt that nascent soul was unreachable, and that a 4th grade origin energy realm cultivator would be a god. But now that I see a 5th grade and 6th grade origin energy realm cultivator, this Xiao feels somewhat uneasy. Haha, Xiaohua, you're a Taoist cultivator, so you don't know the background of my Confucian clan. If you become a guest elder of my Morong clan in the future, you'll know. Morong Songyun smiled and said, the Confucian cultivators you've seen before are all training outside. At most, they're at the upper 4th grade. Those above 5th grade are all cultivating in the clan. If there's nothing important, they won't show themselves. When the war between immortals and Buddhas comes, you'll see the strength of my Confucian clan. It'll definitely shock you. What about the guest elders of the various Confucian clans? Are there any out-of-body, spirit-severing stage cultivators? Xiaohua asked. This is the secret of my scholarly cultivator clan. You'll naturally know after you become a guest elder. Morong Songyun didn't directly answer. Seeing that the Skunda demon subduing array diagram had descended less than 10 feet, the Buddhist light had already enveloped Xiaohua and the others. Xiaohua began to circulate the quintessential essence in his body. Xiaohua's Taoism cultivation was much more effective against the Buddhist sect's techniques. Suddenly, Xiaohua asked, how many people know the truth of the matter? Not too much. Morong Songyun replied without hesitation, this matter is of great importance. If this concubine wasn't the bait, this concubine wouldn't know. In other words, Miss Morong is in great danger. Xiaohua looked at Morong Songyun meaningfully. That's why I asked fellow immortal Xiao to take pity on me. At this point, Morong Songyun could only plead. 14th uncle has been invited to control the sword diagram. He won't be able to return anytime soon. Sigh. The mechanism was too clever, and it took Qingqing's life instead. Xiao Hua looked down at the sword guard and said, if it wasn't for this sword guard, most people would have been able to escape. If they could escape, how could the Buddhist sect take the bait? Murong Tsongyun replied, if you want to do anything, you have to pay a price. What's the use of the Skanda demon subduing array diagram? How could the Buddhist sect's disciples use this Skanda demon subduing array diagram to kill Confucian cultivators? Xiao Hua asked again. This Buddhist artifact has been in the Chu family's possession for so long. They must have found some clues, right? This concubine really doesn't know. Otherwise, this concubine wouldn't be so worried. Murong Tsongyun bitterly smiled. Then, her face turned cold. However, if in the end, this concubine can't survive alone, this concubine will order Chu Jianjin to destroy this sword diagram. Let those Buddhist sect's disciples who attacked us die with us in the demonic god blood pool. See, Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. He looked at Murong Tsongyun. He really didn't expect that this beautiful woman in front of him was actually so ruthless. Moreover, it was even more impossible for him to know that if he didn't have the strength of a fifth-level origin energy, how could Murong Tsongyun tell him the truth and even have other plans? Murong Tsongyun didn't care about Xiao Hua's shock. She said indifferently, Xiao Hua, you don't know how hard it is for us Confucian cultivators to grow up. This concubine has to go through so much trouble to reach this point. This concubine has to let them know. Murong Tsongyun was never weak. Them? Xiao Hua understood. He knew that Murong Tsongyun's words had another meaning. However, he didn't want to get involved with the Murong family's matters. He waved his hand, and the array diagram within a few li flashed with lightning. Balls of Buddhist light were shattered by the lightning. Stop! Xiao Hua, what are you doing? Chu Jianjin's angry voice came from the sword mark. If you attack again, don't blame this old man for not giving the Murong family any face. Actually, there was no need for Chu Jianjin to say anything. Xiao Hua, who was proficient in Buddhist techniques, already saw something strange, this array diagram. How can it produce soul strands? Because in the lightning, extremely dim green light strands were faintly produced. They were attached to the intense Buddhist light, like the faint stamen of a heavenly flower. If one wasn't proficient in Buddhist techniques and soul cultivation techniques, how could they see it? No, this isn't a Buddhist weapon. Xiao Hua hurriedly shouted, this is a soul weapon. Oh. This time, it was Murong Tsongyun's turn to be surprised. What did you say? Xiao Hua, soul weapon? What's a soul weapon? Unfortunately, before Xiao Hua could speak, and before the Skanda demon suppression array diagram could land on the sword diagram, the several hundred Skanda images on the diagram began to move. Pu. Every Skanda image was like a blooming daisy as hundreds of green seal characters flew out from these Skanda images. Each of the green seal characters caused a strange movement, just like when Xiao Hua used the green seal characters. The moaning of gods and ghosts immediately reverberated in the sky above the demonic god blood pool. The black clouds that were already low in pressure became even more rampant. One by one, it was as if the green seal characters had summoned a demon god and viciously pounced on the people on the sword diagram. The several hundred green seal characters began to flicker with a dark green brilliance and began to collide with each other. One after another, there were only a few dozen left. Not good. Although Xiao Hua didn't know what use these green seal characters had, he knew that they had the power of gods and ghosts. As long as these green seal characters were completed, they might be able to destroy heaven and earth. Therefore, Xiao Hua didn't hesitate to use the lightning and thunder technique, wanting to use the three corpsine lightning to destroy these green seal characters. However, just as a dark green brilliance appeared between Xiao Hua's eyebrows, the sword scars around Xiao Hua and Murong Tsongyun gave birth to a huge sword light and slashed towards Xiao Hua's waist. Fudge! Xiao Hua roared, waving both hands in front of him to summon several sword pillars to fight back against the sword light. At the same time, he summoned more lightning and thunder to meet the enormous green seal text. Kong Kong! A deafening sound of swords rang out. Xiao Hua's sword pillars were destroyed by the sword light of the sword diagram. The remaining sword light slashed towards Xiao Hua's waist. In an instant, the chi protecting Xiao Hua's body was destroyed. Ah! Xiao Hua didn't even make a sound before Morong Tsongyun cried out. She didn't expect Chu Jianjun to suddenly make a move. The sword diagram controlled by tens of thousands of people was indeed powerful. Even Xiao Hua, who was at the 6th level of origin energy, wasn't a match for the sword chi. Kong! A sound that wasn't inferior to the previous sword cry came from Xiao Hua's body. A string of sparks jumped in the air. When the sword light landed on Xiao Hua's body, it actually didn't injure Xiao Hua at all. Morong Tsongyun, who was originally anxious, was dumbfounded. However, she only stood there blankly for a moment before she angrily roared, "Chu Jianjun, what are you doing?" "Humph." Chu Jianjun's voice sounded. "Xiao Hua, this is only a warning. If you make any more moves, it won't be that simple, eh?" Chu Jianjun didn't even finish his warning before the huge ball of lightning landed on the green seal characters. Xiao Hua was now a sorcerer. Although he didn't know many soul spells, his lightning and thunder technique was several times stronger than before. The 3 corpses in lightning tore through the void. It also carried the might of gods and ghosts. It was extremely powerful. Lightning flashed within a few hundred li of the sword diagram. However, although Xiao Hua was strong, he wasn't as strong as the Skanda demonic formation. The several hundred Buddhist disciples used their telekinesis to activate the green seal characters to cover a few thousand li. Xiao Hua's 3 corpses in lightning covered 1 or 2 of the green seal characters. However, under Xiao Hua's in lightning, only half of the soul strands were destroyed. The entire green seal character wasn't damaged at all. Under the illumination of the lightning, the gigantic green seal text was even faster than the lightning. It rapidly condensed and transformed into a new green seal text. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to hesitate whether or not he should use his soul technique again, 1,000 li large green seal text finally flickered in the air. What kind of green seal character is this? Xiao Hua's eyes were filled with shock. He didn't know what this green seal character was. Of course, he also knew that this huge green seal character wasn't one of the 365 green seal characters. Instead, it was a green seal character made up of several hundred green seal characters. Woo! A strong, chilly wind suddenly blew, and the huge green seal character strangely shrunk to the size of a few miles. As the green seal character shrunk, a whirlpool of a few miles in size gradually emerged from the green seal character. Waves of green light flowed out from the whirlpool, and Xiao Hua felt a sense of familiarity from the bottom of his heart. Teleportation channel? Xiao Hua saw the channel and immediately understood the Buddhist sect's intentions. He hurriedly shouted, "Morong Tsongyun, this is a teleportation channel. The Buddhist sect wants to use this channel to send experts over." -13. Chapter 3891. Morong Tsongyun wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Not just her, even Chu Jianjun, Morong Junpeng, and the rest of the aristocratic families didn't think that the Buddhist sect deliberately gave the Chu clan a Buddhist item, was actually a teleportation channel. Everyone was thinking about the Buddhist item, but no one knew that there was a soul item inside the Buddhist item. What's the use of regretting now? With the sound of the sword diagram, tens of thousands of sword marks flashed with a strong sword aura, and a sword net slashed towards the teleportation channel. Ha ha ha! A loud laughter came from the tunnel. A fat monk, about 10 feet tall, flew out arrogantly with a monk's staff in his hand and a Buddhist cloud in his hand. The moment the monk flew out, the staff immediately left his hand. Roar! A dragon's roar rang out as the staff transformed into a huge dragon that charged at the net of swords. Immediately after, the monk's body trembled and the kasaya flew out as well. It transformed into a red cloud that was several miles wide and blocked the path. "Amitabha, go!" Behind the monk, a low voice also came out, and a short old monk suddenly appeared. With a shake of his hand, a fist-sized black thing flew out of his hand. As soon as that thing fell into the air, it immediately emitted a Buddhist light, and under the urging of psychokinesis, it turned into a mountain that also blocked the channel. Kong Kong. First, the staff that turned into a dragon collided with the sword net, and several sounds of metal clashing rang out. The dragon was killed, and the staff broke into several pieces. Then, poo-pew-pew, several muffled sounds rang out, and the red cloud that was several li in size was also cut into countless small pieces by the sword light, and one by one slowly floated down. After the red cloud, it was naturally the monk who flew out first. The monk roared angrily, and his fat body expanded rapidly. Fine lines of Sanskrit characters flashed on his skin, and the fine lines emitted a faint Buddhist light. Clang, clang, clang. Similar to the sound of Xiao Hua's physical body colliding with the sword light earlier, the sword light that was blocked one after another was weakened. When it landed on the monk's golden Buddha statue, it only left behind deep bloody scars. It didn't kill the monk. At the same time, hundreds of sword light landed on the mountain behind, and the entire mountain let out a loud roar. Sanskrit runes flowed out from the mountain, and after the sword light landed a few feet into the mountain, it couldn't go any further. Haha. The fat monk laughed, and then several monks flew out from the teleportation channel. These monks were all tall, short, fat, and thin, but they were all protectors of the Buddhist sect, and all of them were around the 6th or 7th grade of origin energy. Damn it. Murong Tsongyun's face was pale. Where did so many Buddhist protectors come from? At this moment, a scream came out of the fat monk's mouth. A rather dim sword beam took advantage of the fat monk's laughter and strangely stabbed into his neck. The fat monk couldn't dodge in time and blood immediately splattered everywhere. Following that, the sword net from before penetrated his body, instantly turning him into a corpse. The flesh and blood of the monks fell, but when it passed by the sword diagram, the sword light on the sword guard flickered, as if it wasn't affected at all, and it fell down from the sword diagram, deep into the blood of the gods and demons. Umitba, the skinny old monk chanted, and his eyes shone with a fierce light. However, at this time, he was also tired of dealing with the sword light of the sword diagram, so he didn't have the energy to kill the Confucian cultivators on the sword diagram. Of course, even if this old monk used all his strength to activate the mountain under the sword diagram, it didn't take long for the mountain to be split into pieces, and the old monk also couldn't escape. Wherever the sword passed, he turned into minced meat like the fat monk and fell into the blood pool. 2 monks died, and even more monks rushed out from the teleportation channel. The sword light was like a net, and the sword light was like a sickle, reaping the lives of the monks. But with the increase of monks, and the strategy that the monks had already formulated, in the time it took to eat a meal, and under the situation where hundreds of monks died, thousands of monks had already flown out from the teleportation channel and flew towards the 4 directions of the sword diagram and began to counterattack. Thus, one by one, the Confucian cultivators began to fall. No, we must destroy this teleportation channel. Looking at the Buddhist sect protectors rushing out from the channel that looked like the mouth of a monster, Xiao Hua anxiously said, "These Buddhist sect protectors are too strong. Each of them is at the 6th or 7th grade of origin energy. When they all fly out, it will be the time for us to fall." No. Xiao Hua. Almost at the same time, Murong Tsongyun shouted, "Absolutely not. My Confucian family set up such a trap with great difficulty to lure the Buddhist sect protectors into it. If you destroy this channel, won't you ruin the important matter that my Confucian family has agreed on? Don't think that the Buddhist sect protectors are strong, but the Chu family's sword diagram is definitely worthy of its reputation. It will definitely be able to fight evenly with these Buddhist sect protectors. Moreover, Chu Jianjin has already sent out a message. We only need to hold on, and before long, the Chu family and the other families will arrive with reinforcements." Murong Tsongyun was abnormally panicked just now because she didn't know what the Buddhist sect disciples were planning. But now that she saw the teleportation channel, she immediately calculated in her heart. She felt that although the Confucian cultivators were somewhat passive, the entire situation was still under their control. The Confucian cultivators hadn't revealed their final move yet, so she had courage and a plan. On the other hand, Xiao Hua had failed to stop the soul tool and was instead misunderstood by the Chu family. Now, he had a deep impression of the situation. "But," Xiao Hua said angrily, Although the message was sent quickly, it was still 3 days ahead of the original plan. Even if seniors rushed over, not to mention whether or not they could exterminate these Buddhist sect protectors, even more than half of the cultivators on the sword diagram would die. How can people like Qinzhua and Su Chuanping who came with me survive? Everyone will die in the end. If you want to win, you must pay a price. Murong Songyun indifferently said. Since they stepped on the sword diagram, they must be prepared to die. Xiaohua, what we need to do now is to protect ourselves. Use your brain and think about it. If the Buddhist sect disciples set up such a trap, how could they not think of the channel being destroyed? Since they aren't protecting this channel, do you think you can destroy it? Do you have the cultivation to do so? Xiaohua was speechless. His eyes stared straight at the transmission channel in the sky. His mind quickly recalled the soul techniques he knew. Unfortunately, before he could think of anything, he heard a Buddhist chant coming from above his head. Then, a tall and thin monk appeared on the sword guard. He threw the alms bowl in his hand into the air. The Buddhist light inside was like a waterfall falling from the sky. Just as the Buddhist light fell, it had the momentum of a storm. Every ray of Buddhist light had the strength of a dragon and elephant. Not only did it suppress the sword light, it also wanted to turn Xiaohua and Murong Songyun into meat paste. Canopy Transformation Realm? 6th grade elemental energy? Seeing how powerful the Buddha's light was and how terrifying the force was, Xiaohua immediately sensed the monk's strength. Xiaohua couldn't help but feel an unusual bitterness in his mouth. This monk was the strongest person in the Buddhist sect that Xiaohua had ever met. Although Xiaohua's current strength had already reached the lower tier of the 6th grade, it was still troublesome to face this Buddhist sect's Dharma protector who was clearly at the upper tier of the 6th grade. Bald donkey. On the other side, Murong Songyun didn't dare to hold back anymore. As he cursed, he waved his hand and a string of pearls flew out. The pearls flew into the air and immediately flashed with a white light. The pearls suddenly expanded and flew toward the alms bowl. The light was like sword light piercing through the Buddhist light. Seeing the pearls fly out with difficulty, Murong Songyun's subbody opened his mouth and a huge pillar of qi landed on the pearls. The pearls spun, and each pearl released a suction force and sucked in the qi. Wong wong. The 6 pearls each let out a different rumbling sound. Moreover, each of them spun violently with different rhythms. Boom. Almost at the same time, the 6 pearls exploded and the words, rites, music, archery, defense, calligraphy, and divination flew out. Weren't they the 6 arts of Confucianism? After the 6 inscriptions of armor flew out, hundreds of Howren Qi pillars penetrated from the void and rushed into the inscriptions of armor. Pieces of clouds mixed with strands of sparkling light flashed, holding the alms bowl. Although the alms bowl spewed out a Buddhist light that was even heavier than a mountain. When this Buddhist light landed on the clouds rolled crazily. The 6 inscriptions on the armor flashed with a strong brilliance and still firmly blocked this Buddhist light. Good. Xiaohua praised. His body flashed with a dark golden light. He raised his hand and held the wishful steel staff in his hand. Grow, grow, grow. After a few chants, the wishful steel staff suddenly expanded. Hit. Xiaohua raised the wishful steel staff with both hands and hit the alms bowl. Boom. The Buddhist light on the alms bowl trembled and turned into fragments. The alms bowl itself was like a giant peak that collapsed and fell into the hands of the old monk. It obviously couldn't resist the power of Xiaohua's wishful steel staff. Good. When Murong Songyun saw this, she was overjoyed. She understood that her true qi was not as good as the old monk's, so she relied on the advantage of the weapon to resist. Xiaohua was a Dao sect cultivator, so the weapon in his hand was even more powerful. Although the old monk in front of her was at the upper 6th level of true qi, with the two of them working together, they might have the power to fight. Since she had the power to fight, she naturally didn't have to worry about the danger of dying. Murong Songyun could understand. So how could the old monk not see? But the old monk didn't panic at all. He held an alms bowl in his right hand. The alms bowl spun a few times in the air and then fell towards Murong Songyun. Then he formed a seal with both of his hands. His mind power surged towards Xiaohua as he shouted, Umitba, attack! Hiss. Seeing the old monk's Buddhist seal descending, the heavenly dragon in the void roared. Strands of lotus-like red flames flew out, and a force that could knock an immortal into the mortal world descended. How could Xiao Hua not know that this was the karmic power of the Buddhist sect? Fellow immortal Confucian, help me. Xiao Hua couldn't move in the sword guard. He could only rely on the flying sword that was tempered by the immeasurable fire to resist the karma power. Buzz. Xiao Hua opened his mouth and the red and blue sword light flew out and pierced the Buddhist seal. -13. Chapter 3892. Kong Kong. The red and blue sword light let out a wailing sound. Although the sword chi was sharp, it directly pierced into the seal and blocked the red lotus fire. However, the power within the seal still made the sword light dim. If it wasn't for the fact that the sword light was already formless, it would have already been broken. Oh? The old monk was stunned. Before he could figure out how Xiao Hua broke his red lotus fire, Shua, the sound of flowing water came from the old monk's bald head. Pieces of heavenly flowers suddenly appeared. As soon as these heavenly flowers appeared, they immediately withered and shattered. It was as if a gust of wind blew past the old monk. Ah! The old monk was shocked. He quickly patted his chest. A layer of Buddhist light appeared in front of his chest and covered his upper body. What a pity! Xiao Hua sighed. Just now, he wanted to use the soul-piercing technique to sneak attack the old monk, but the old monk's Niwen palace also had a defense. Although the heavenly flowers were destroyed, the old monk didn't suffer any damage. However, even so, the old monk was still shocked. He couldn't help but be on guard against this unremarkable Confucian cultivator in front of him. Amitabha. The old monk chanted the name of Buddha. He held the flower in his right hand and said, "The human world is full of spring and autumn. The flowers bloom and wither every year. Why don't you enter my pure land, where you will have no sleep, no rest, and no spring and autumn?" As the old monk waved his right hand, a gust of wind carrying Buddhist light fell towards Xiao Hua. The Buddhist light and the Buddhist light flowed like water waves. Within the water waves, a heavenly flower was born. As the Buddhist light flew, the heavenly flower slowly bloomed and then slowly withered. The heavenly flower was only a few hundred feet away from Xiao Hua. The distance of a few hundred feet flashed by. Within this few hundred feet, the heavenly flower sprouted and withered several times. It really was the power of life and death of the Buddhist sect. Xiao Hua dodged. In the distance, Murong Tsongyun was using the inscriptions on the jewel alone to resist the alms bowl. With her strength that had just entered the 5th level of origin energy, she couldn't help Xiao Hua at all. Kong. Without waiting for Murong Tsongyun's scream to disappear, several sword lights flew out from the sword guard and pierced towards the heavenly flower. Although the sword beam was sharp, the moment it charged into the Buddhist light that was enveloped by the heavenly flower, the sword beam immediately slowed down. Then, the sword beam was dispersed, and in a few seconds, all the sword beams were reduced to nothingness. Motherfucker. The Buddhist sect's methods are starting to become strange when they reach a high level. Xiao Hua's eyes narrowed slightly as he pondered to himself. Buddha Bodhi is still in seclusion. The methods of the Buddhist sect can't compare to this old monk. Moreover, even if I could deal with this monk, it wouldn't be suitable for me to use it now. Compared to the strange methods of the Buddhist sect, only the soul techniques of soul cultivators can compare. Although this Xiao has reached the realm of soul cultivation, his soul techniques are lacking. Thinking of this, a thought flashed through Xiao Hua's mind. He saw that the heavenly flower was approaching, and that oppressive Buddhist light was also covering him. Layers upon layers of strange bubbles appeared on his skin. Xiao Hua opened his mouth. Puff! A 4-colored true qi mixed with 3 lights rushed into the Buddhist light. Shua! Like a spring breeze, the withering heavenly flower suddenly became spirited. The petals swelled, and a burst of vitality came from the heavenly flower. The bubbles on Xiao Hua's skin also disappeared in an instant. Amitabha. The old monk was shocked. The life and death of the heavenly flower was already out of his control. The power of life and death that he was proud of was useless under Xiao Hua's true qi. This was the first time in his life that he had encountered something like this. Forget it. The old monk let out a sigh. With a wave of his right hand, the alms bowl fell into his hand, and with a wave of his left hand, a huge demon-subduing pestle appeared. Then, the golden body of the old monk suddenly withered, and the demon-subduing pestle gently fell down. As soon as the demon-subduing pestle fell, not to mention the sword guard where Xiao Hua and Murong Tsongyun were, even the sword guards nearby were enveloped. An inexplicable feeling of fear emerged from Xiao Hua's heart. The wishful staff in Xiao Hua's hand was abnormally heavy, and it seemed that he couldn't lift it. Io, not good. Could it be that the warning sign from before was here? Xiao Hua was shocked. He looked at Murong Tsongyun's 6-word inscription and couldn't retrieve it in time. The demon-subduing pestle fell down, and whether it was the clouds or the crystal threads, including the inscription, they all turned into fragments. The clouds and crystal threads turned into nothingness, and the inscription fell into the pearl. Fortunately, the pearl was refined by a Confucian blacksmith. Although it was hit by the demon-subduing pestle, it still fell in front of Murong Tsongyun and didn't shatter. Murong Tsongyun bit his lips. As he caught the pearl, his feet moved. Wong. A thick sword light soared into the sky. However, this sword light looked very powerful, but just as it flew into the sky, it was extinguished by the demon-subduing pestle like a candle. Damn it! Looking at the full power attack of the 6th-level Origin Energy Buddhist, Xiao Hua couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Needless to say, Xiao Hua was unable to block this attack. If it was a normal place, Xiao Hua could use the lightning escape technique to escape. However, he was already connected to the sword diagram. How could he escape? However, looking at the sword light under Murong Tsongyun's feet, Xiao Hua suddenly understood. Since Murong Tsongyun can borrow the power of the sword diagram, why can't I? And I know how to transform into a sword. Although I can't be compared to this old monk, but at least I can fight back. Thinking of this, the demon-subduing pestle was already close to him. Xiao Hua had no other choice. He clenched his teeth and hurriedly withdrew the wishful staff. He shouted, "Miss Murong, quickly withdraw your sub-body and hide under my sword." Under the power of the demon-subduing pestle, Xiao Hua's voice sounded very faint. When Murong Tsongyun heard this, she couldn't help but be startled. Her sub-body was also covered by the demon-subduing pestle. It was already difficult for her to continue. Now that she was pushing the boat with the current, her sub-body quickly shrunk and finally transformed into an inscription and fell into Murong Tsongyun's head. Wang Wang. Just as Murong Tsongyun withdrew her sub-body, the sword guard where the two of them were flashed with extremely dazzling sword light. Sword patterns flowed like water and gathered under Xiao Hua's feet. Then, like water flowing up Xiao Hua's legs, the sword light overflowed from the soles of Xiao Hua's feet to his waist. And when Murong Tsongyun blinked, Xiao Hua's Dharma body had completely transformed into a huge flying sword. This flying sword was firmly connected with the sword guard. It looked like the sword pillar that pierced into the blood pool. It had the momentum of a sword soaring into the sky. Boom! Xiao Hua's sword had just formed when the demon-subduing pestle had already fallen. It was still as light as a feather, like a horsetail whisk. However, when the pestle smashed onto Xiao Hua's sword, a huge roar sounded. An invisible wave of qi suddenly lifted the demon-subduing pestle. Xiao Hua's sword made a kacha sound, and the sword light disappeared into nothingness. Under the dim sword light, the dark golden color on Xiao Hua's body crazily twisted and then disappeared into the surface layer. What was left was his skin and flesh being torn apart, and eerie white bones being exposed from his flesh and blood. Even the previously unbreakable sword guard under Xiao Hua's body was now broken. Waves of blood gushed out from the broken part. Looking at Xiao Hua again, his eyes were closed, his face was pale gold, and his sword hadn't completely recovered. His entire body was falling towards the broken part of the sword guard. "Xiao Hua!" Murong Tsongyun cried out. She hurriedly waved her hand, wanting to grab Xiao Hua's sword. However, at this moment, the demon-subduing pestle that Xiao Hua had blocked was swung again. The old monk, who had blood flowing out of his orifices, had a ferocious expression as he swung the demon-subduing pestle again towards Murong Tsongyun. Murong Tsongyun was shocked. How could she still dare to care about Xiao Hua? She hurriedly took out another imperial weapon to block it. However, the current Murong Tsongyun couldn't block the demon-subduing pestle at all. Under the demon-subduing pestle, Murong Tsongyun's imperial weapon couldn't even form clouds. You dare. Seeing that the situation was extremely dangerous and that Murong Tsongyun was about to die, an angry roar came from the distance. Immediately after, an almost solid pillar of qi came crashing down. Boom! With a loud sound, the demon-subduing pestle, which was much weaker than before, was sent flying by the pillar of qi. The old monk's body also trembled a few times, and tears of blood flowed out of his eyes. 14th uncle. Seeing Murong Juanping's body fly over, Murong Tsongyun hurriedly shouted, "Quickly come and save me." No matter. Murong Juanping flew into the air and shouted, "Tsongyun, hold on for a bit longer. 7th uncle and the others will be here soon." Okay. Murong Tsongyun heard that 7th uncle was coming and was shocked. However, when she looked at where Xiao Hua was, there was a bloody mist coming out of the sword guard. Xiao Hua's body was nowhere to be seen. Ka. Murong Juanping's body landed on the edge of the sword guard. He waved the inscriptions in his hand, and the sword light on the sword guard quickly flashed. In a short moment, the place where Xiao Hua fell into the pool of blood was filled. Then, he looked at Murong Tsongyun and said with regret, "What a pity. This Xiao Hua is really a talent." This old man watched from afar. He was actually able to block the attack of a Buddhist guardian who was at the upper 6th level of elemental energy. He is more than qualified to be a guest of the Murong family. Sigh. Speaking of which, Xiao Hua also lost his life to save me. Murong Tsongyun was a bit disappointed. If I knew this would happen, I would have let 16th uncle come. 16th brother? Murong Juanping sneered. His cultivation is higher than Xiao Hua's, but can you guarantee that he will be as strong as Xiao Hua? Do you think 7th uncle arranged this blindly? Besides, Xiao Hua is an outsider. If 16th brother died here, 7th uncle wouldn't be able to explain it to the family. You met Xiao Hua. It can only be said that you were lucky. Sigh, that's true. As Murong Tsongyun spoke, she looked at the demon-subduing pestle in the distance. The old monk had just grabbed it, and the sword light on the sword guard immediately pierced towards it. The old monk had no time to attack Murong Tsongyun. However, at this moment, Murong Tsongyun suddenly saw an extremely hidden Buddhist light from the corner of her eyes. It was flying through the sword mark. She hurriedly shouted, 14th uncle, your left arm, -13. Chapter 38-93. When Murong Juanping heard Murong Tsongyun's reminder, he hastily looked at his left arm. It was a string of skull-shaped prayer beads attacking him. Murong Juanping didn't dare to be careless and hastily activated his Zhanqi to defend himself. He fought with another Buddhist protector whose strength wasn't inferior to his own and temporarily couldn't take care of Murong Tsongyun. At this time, the battle above the sword diagram was already in a stalemate. Sounds of killing filled the air. Buddhist protectors and Confucian disciples were fighting in every sword compartment. There were no more monks coming down from the transmission channel in the sky. It was still like the mouth of a strange beast, ferociously rotating there. The Buddhist protectors that flew out from the transmission channel were all carefully selected. Which one of them wasn't at the 6th or 7th grade of origin energy? Moreover, these protectors had seen blood before and were merciless in their attacks. Xiao Hua and Murong Juanping were still able to hold on, but Chen Zhua and Su Chuanping, who wanted to take advantage of the situation, had already been smashed into a bloody pulp. Of course, some of these Buddhist protectors were also killed, and the number wasn't small. However, they were caught off guard, and the Confucian cultivators were in a passive position. This was originally a trap that the Chu clan had deliberately set up, but now it actually became a great opportunity for the Buddhist sects to kill the Confucian cultivators. In Murong Tsongyun's heart, This blood wave that human cultivators simply couldn't touch would definitely instantly corrode Xiaohua's body into white bones. However, contrary to her expectations, when Xiaohua's body fell into the blood wave, the blood mist and black flames immediately corroded the sword radiance around Xiaohua's body. The sword that hadn't completely escaped before completely disappeared in a few breaths of time. The Dharma body also shrank back into Xiaohua's body under the indescribable cold fluctuation of the blood wave. However, when Xiaohua's body was revealed and the blood mist rushed into his body to wreak havoc, strands of black flames rushed out from the torn parts of Xiaohua's body. They were like pythons that tangled with the blood mist. Then, the blood mist and black flames within several hundred feet gathered towards Xiaohua's body. Jiji. A rather arrogant voice came from Xiaohua's body. Damn it! What demonic god blood pool? It's just an extremely strange demon realm. Io, something's wrong. This voice naturally came from the demonic spirit that cultivated the blood-drop paradise in Xiaohua's bloodline. Xiaohua was knocked unconscious by the demon subduing Pestle, and several of his primordial spirits had the opportunity to appear. In this demonic god blood pool, only the demonic spirit Xiaohua spoke. However, just as the demonic spirit Xiaohua wanted to use his cultivation method to absorb the power of the blood pool to repair his body and protect him, a very cold fluctuation suddenly came and froze the demonic spirit Xiaohua's demonic flame. Not only did it prevent the demonic spirit Xiaohua from absorbing the blood wave, it also wanted to seal Xiaohua's bloodline. No. This is definitely not the demonic realm's demonic qi and demonic blood. No wonder the righteous qi of Confucian cultivators that specializes in restraining demonic qi couldn't do anything. The demonic spirit Xiaohua shouted in shock. Following the demonic spirit Xiaohua's scream, that fluctuation instantly penetrated Xiaohua's bloodline. This fluctuation was very different from ordinary cold. It didn't have the kind of freezing that could be seen with the naked eye. Instead, it sealed the tiniest blood strands in the blood strands, making them unable to move. Even the golden strands within the blood strands also dimmed. Xiaohua's body remained motionless. The wounds on his body also didn't have any healing. He just slowly fell into the lower layer of the blood wave. This demonic god blood pool was very strange. Previously, when the sword diagram smashed down the sword pillar, it seemed to have imprisoned the entire blood pool. Later, the 8 beauties pushed the sword diagram down several thousand zhang. This sword diagram should be close to the ground, but Xiaohua's body kept falling down, as if the blood pool had no bottom. Looking at the top of Xiaohua's body, it was precisely the sword diagram that completely enveloped the blood pool. At this moment, other than the sword diagram that had deeply pierced into the blood pool, there were streams of essence blood flowing out. Even the bottom of the sword diagram, pieces of flesh and white bones had also seeped through the sword diagram and fell into the blood pool. Different from Xiaohua's body, when these pieces of flesh fell into the blood pool, they were immediately corroded by the blood wave. The blood wave didn't just corrode the flesh, it even turned the bones into powder. The strangest thing was that after the flesh and bones disappeared, they turned into strands of blood essence. They seemed to have a life of their own as they swam in the blood waves. They were either attached to the sword pillars or attached to the black flames as they rushed into the blood swamp. It was as if there was an endless temptation down there. The strands of invisible green in the blood essence seemed to be the command of the blood essence. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of drops of blood essence dripped down like rain. Behind each drop, there was a black flame. Each drop represented hundreds of years, or even thousands of years of cultivation essence. After a long time, the blood essence finally stopped dripping. It stopped above a restriction that couldn't be detected by divine sense or Buddhist sense. The sound of this restriction, the blood wave and the black flames roared like a storm. Under this restriction, the blood wave and the black flames crazily surged out, and the ice-cold fluctuation was emitted from this restriction at the same time. The blood essence fell on the restriction and instantly scattered, forming one figure after another. These figures were all human figures. They were the Confucian scholars, Buddhist sons, or Taoist cultivators that the blood essence belonged to. The human figures struggled in panic. Outside the green core, The blood red gradually formed the shape of a flame. Puff, puff. The concentrated sounds were insignificant in the blood waves, but these sounds caused the blood-red humanoid figures to disappear into the restriction. Every time a blood essence was absorbed by the restriction would slightly sway. After a while, the restriction would tremble like a heartbeat, and the blood waves of the entire fiend god blood pool would become even more vast and mighty. At a corner of the restriction, Xiaohua's body had already fallen. His thin body trembled up and down along with the restriction. Because not a single drop of blood essence fell from Xiaohua's body, even though the blood wave above the restriction washed away Xiaohua's flesh like seaweed, he was still peacefully lying there without moving. Above the dark blood and lightless restriction, the devil spirit Xiaohua seemed to have been frozen stiff. He said in a low and trembling voice, "Fellow Taoists, this poor Taoist is about to be unable to move. Are you not going to think of a way?" "Which fellow Taoist are you?" Soul cultivator Xiaohua's voice was heard again. "Can't you see that I is helping you resist the fluctuation? This fluctuation is extremely strange. It can absorb a person's soul. So much blood essence fused into the restriction, but the soul within the blood essence is indeed being absorbed by this fluctuation. Yes, yes, this little brother knows." The demonic spirit Xiaohua was very humble. "This little brother can't compare to big brothers, so I don't dare to call myself I. However, seeing that we all came from the same sect, please save this little brother. This restriction is strange, and the fluctuation is even stranger. I discovered that the fluctuation within the restriction is undergoing a slight change. If possible, you might as well wait a little longer." Ever since the bone-tempering Xiaohua obtained the metal origin, he became increasingly quiet. He was cultivating every moment, and it was rare for him to say a word. "Big brothers, this little brother doesn't have your divine abilities. This little brother only feels like he's going to be frozen to death." The demonic spirit Xiaohua seemed to be frowning as he called out, "This old man can help you." A rather dignified voice sounded. "However, this old man can't guarantee that this senior won't be affected after saving you. After all, previously, we all suffered losses at your hands." "Oh, fellow immortal actually has a way?" The phoenix-bodied Xiaohua was somewhat astonished, because that dignified voice actually belonged to the scholarly cultivator Xiaohua. "I am also trying my best to repair my physical body. However, this fluctuation is not only ice-cold, but also extremely destructive. I can only prevent myself from being further damaged by the fluctuation." The scholarly cultivator Xiaohua seemed to have matured into a great scholar. He was extremely magnanimous as he calmly replied, "This old man didn't dare to agree to help the sacred sand when ancestral temple before, but after obtaining the sacred sand when innate true chi, this old man dares to say this. However, although this old man can help the demonic spirit, this old man's assistance is very effective for his cultivation. Without this senior's consent, this old man doesn't dare to act rashly." When the scholarly cultivator Xiaohua said this, no one dared to speak. After all, when Xiaohua was controlled by the demonic blade, it was with the help of the demonic spirit. At that time, all the primordial spirits knew how terrifying it was. Even the demonic spirit Xiaohua seemed to have a lingering fear and remained silent. As for Xiaohua's left hand, where the demonic blade was fused into the bone, there was no movement in the bloody waves. After a moment of deathly silence, a few faint, clear lights strangely appeared in the bloody sea. Then, several faint human figures appeared in the bloody sea. "Shu." The soul cultivator Xiaohua hurriedly whispered, "There seems to be someone in the demonic god blood pool. Wait a moment, let I listen." While the soul cultivator Xiaohua was speaking, the illusion breaker eye on his forehead slowly opened. He used the heaven's eye connection. He saw 8 human figures in the clear light. They were the 8 beauty sculptures from before. However, at this time, the 8 beauty sculptures were standing straight in the bloody waves. Inside the clear light, countless 7-colored clouds blocked the bloody waves and the black flames outside. They simply couldn't allow the crystal beauties to corrode. A voice came from one of the crystal beauties. "Family head, isn't it about time? I'm afraid we can't wait here for too long. That monk from the Buddhist sect is too sinister." He actually set up a trap to disrupt our rhythm. Now that the experts from the Murong family haven't arrived in time, our Chu family's disciples should have suffered a lot. Let's wait a little longer. An old voice came from another crystal beauty. If we go out now, the Buddhist sect's disciples will be disturbed. If they escape into the passage, it will be troublesome. Moreover, the current blood essence is not enough to open the restriction and release the demonic god chess. Family head, this blood essence is the blood of cultivators. It's far from the blood essence of ordinary people. If too much of it flows out, I'm afraid the restriction will be opened one step ahead of time. The old voice was somewhat hesitant. This old man is also not sure. According to our plan, we will be the last to appear. After killing the Buddhist sect's disciples, the demonic god blood pool will be our Chu family's world. But who would have thought that this bullshit Skunda devil image formation was actually a transmission formation? So many Buddhist sect's disciples came, and Murongjiang and the others couldn't come in time because they were avoiding the Buddhist sect's inspection. If we go out and can't kill all the Buddhist sect's disciples, Murongjiang and the others will definitely be able to sense the change in the restriction when they return. -13.